Irish Breakdown Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Monday, April 7th. It is my mom's birthday. I want to begin today's show wishing my mother a very, very happy 69th birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. Had 17th anniversary for Ange and I this past weekend, so it's been a busy, busy time. But of course, Sean, lots of Notre Dame football stuff going on today. So we got plenty of topics to talk about today. It's going to be the RTCF show. And today's show, we're going to look at three different topics. The R stands for recruiting, and we're going to talk D-line recruiting. We have a lot to say about D-line recruiting, and there will be a little wide receiver recruiting mixed in because some comparisons between the two. We'll talk about that. Then in the team focus, we're going to talk about Notre Dame's potential to turn 2024 into a longer-term run similar to teams we've seen in the past. We're going to discuss, is that where Notre Dame is now? Or is this going to be kind of like a 2014 Oregon, a 2016 Washington, a 2022 TCU, where that run is sort of a one-off? And so, where they'll still be good, but not good like they were in that 2024 season. So we're going to discuss that, reasons why we think that this may be a run, and then some of the potential stumbling blocks to that not happening, Sean. And then, of course, the CF part of the RTCF show is college football. And today we're gonna talk about some teams, Sean, that you and I view as potentially taking a step back this season. We'll define what step back means and go over some of those teams. We have some similarities there. I want to ask him about a couple that I have. There's a couple that he has that I'm gonna want to ask him about. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. And then we'll just briefly talk about Drew Pine going to Bowling Green and what that means for him, and just kind of a warning to portal kids everywhere. We'll talk about that as well. So it's going to be a fun show today, Sean. So, man, I got to tell you, Sean, I'm excited, man. We've been talking about we got multiple topics we want to talk about. We're going to have a conversation about the secondary here on one of these shows, probably next week's Blue Gold game. Next week's RTCF show. Maybe we might have to partner together for a show this week because it may just be something we want to talk about super, super sooner. So we'll find out. We'll find out, Sean. But I got to tell you, man, I'm excited, really excited about today's show.
Super excited. Always great topics and always a great time with Notre Dame fans, IB Nation. And of course, happy birthday. You know what? So special. She's a special woman. I've yet to meet her, and I look forward to meeting her in person really soon this upcoming season. She had to be special to birth and grow and develop this gentleman next to me. She had a different anointing on her life.
Facts.
Happy birthday.
Well, she will greatly appreciate that, Sean. I know she adores you, so it's going to be a fun show. So I want to get rocking and rolling, Sean, because if we go too far into the intros, then you and I go on forever because we have a lot to discuss today. And I want to dive in first to this recruiting conversation because obviously, we did a show on Saturday breaking down the commitment of Ebenezer Iwatade. And Sean, you've actually gotten to know this young man pretty well. You got to know his coaches pretty well. So we shared some of the things that you had shared with me about how good of a job that Marcus Freeman and Al Washington, especially Al Washington, is important. Marcus Freeman's always kind of been a strong recruiter, but just the job that Al Washington did with this young man. And we're going to talk about just in general, Sean, D-line recruiting, because this is an interesting period for Notre Dame when it comes to recruiting the defensive line position because – you and I have had a lot of conversations over the years about a lot of the excuse making that gets made when it comes to recruiting at Notre Dame. And I remember when they were struggling to recruit running backs from like 16 to, I don't know, whenever Lance Taylor was hired. Well, just top running backs don't want to come to Notre Dame. Well, they did when Tony Alford was, yeah, but Tony Alford's unique. Okay, as soon as Autry Denson leaves, Lance Taylor goes out and signs Kyron Williams 1 year, and then he goes out and gets Audric Estime and Logan Diggs the next year, and then Jadarian Price the next year, and then lo and behold, he leaves, and Dylan McCullough shows up, and he lands Jeremiah Love and Keidron Young and Aeneas Williams and Nolan James Jr. And now all of a sudden, Jawan Sider's here, and guess what? Top running backs are visiting Notre Dame again. So was it really that hard to recruit running backs in Notre Dame, or maybe it was the coach who told A.J. Dillon he wasn't good enough to play running back here, just wasn't a good recruiter? You know, and you look at receiver recruiting. That miraculously after they had the stretch of receiver recruiting they had, just top receivers didn't want to come to Notre Dame anymore. Or maybe was there a problem with the receivers coach and what he did? We've seen that with offensive line recruiting over the years. You know, it's like, man, you know, Notre Dame just can't recruit top linemen anymore. Well, then all of a sudden Ed Warner gets replaced by Harry Heastand, and lo and behold, top recruits want to come to Notre Dame again. And I feel like, Sean, that's true at almost every position, with one exception. Defensive line recruiting fits that mold as well. And every position has kids that are talented that will want to come to Notre Dame if you put in the work. But I do think defensive line recruiting is one that, if we're going to talk about all the positions in college football, I do think this is the hardest for Notre Dame to recruit for a number of reasons. And I think that's one where that's a position that more than any other is a show me position. And so you talk about some of the struggles that Notre Dame has had in recent years. I don't care to rehash those. We've talked about those a lot. But Notre Dame is in a stretch right now where the success they've had on the field, solid success in recruiting, especially at end, where are they now? How important is this period? And then also we're going to talk about could the success in this class be a springboard for future success in the trail? And so that's kind of where we're going to get to, Sean, because I think it's okay to acknowledge that way too many excuses were made about why Notre Dame didn't recruit the way it needed to over the years, while also acknowledging that there are some positions that are harder. I don't know if the next cornerbacks coach is going to be able to recruit as well as Mike Mickens did, because he's a bit unique of a coach and a recruiter. But it doesn't mean you then go back to taking a bunch of 3-stars that can't play. Right? It's not like one. But I do think that we can talk about D-line and say, yeah, this is a position that's a little bit harder. You got to be better evaluators. You got to be better recruiters. But it's still a position, if you get the right guy and you do the right things, is a position where you can have success. But I do believe it's one where the players, more than any other position, need to see it.
Well, for me, I think this is a great time, because I think what we're seeing in defensive end recruiting is something that Notre Dame has grown and matured into, right? There's a full process, not only in establishing the program, but then being able, not only in totality, big picture, but also nuances of the positional rooms to recruit, because you can't recruit every room the same way, but you can recruit to what the core of the program is. And so I think there were certain things, there was a lot of culture, pre-culture, but also veteran bricks laid in the defensive line room when Al Washington arrived. Like, he had an Isaiah Foskey, and then he had Howard Cross and the youngsters like behind that were on the come. So he had a lot to work with. And when you have that from a recruiting standpoint, feel free to jump in. When you have certain things in life, sometimes you don't have the urgency in certain other areas, right? And as those things fade away or get closer to being non-existent, now there's more of an urgency. And what you're seeing is now an urgency, but I think there's an even bigger message of learning from mistakes, learning from what the original plan was to build things up and to build the roster up, to now we're shifting in philosophy. I think you're also seeing a shift in philosophy from the defensive line standpoint of who they want to go after and what they want to go after. You know, we used to talk about Viper or that all the time. And now it's like, you know what? Let's just go get guys that can get after the passer, right? That is the one glaring thing that stood out if you watched that game early against Ohio State. If we had some guys that could get after Will Howard and rattle him, similar to what Michigan had, even though they didn't have anything else, they had enough to rattle him and then to interrupt what Ohio State wanted to do. And so that is something moving forward that they identified, that they learned from their experience last year. And I think that they truly learned who they can be. I don't know if they really believe they could do that. They probably always wanted to do that, but they had to see or find a path to how they could get to that, to be able to bring in multiple dynamic pass rushers to be able to do that. Yeah. And now they found a way to do it. Ryan, you have screamed from the mountaintop for at least 5 years, or at least 5 years, that I can remember talking about, look, Notre Dame can go get top 50 talent.
Yes.
There's top 50 talent every year that loves academics that would love to come to Notre Dame. But you can't get them to believe if you don't believe.
Right.
If you don't respect people will only respect you as much as you respect yourself. And now Notre Dame, the head coach, respects Notre Dame far greater, in my opinion, in what they can offer in both areas than the predecessor. And that is why young men can believe what he's saying about what Notre Dame can do for them.
And that's why I said, Sean, kind of when we were talking a minute ago, or like at the beginning of the show, looking at it from standpoint of this is a position where I do think you need to show it. I mean, why did they lose Keon Keeley? Look, people talk about NIL. It really came down to Keon looked at Alabama and said, they have a track record of producing success. Al Washington and this staff don't, because they were in their first year at Notre Dame. Notre Dame hadn't put a lot of good players out into the NFL. They hadn't done a lot of things where they were able to develop top talent and top players and things like that on the D-line. Well, since then, not only did you have Isaiah Foskey's success and what he was able to do, with being a second-round draft pick, back-to-back 11-sack seasons, you go into the next season, you have the success that obviously Javonte Jean-Baptiste had. He got drafted. He didn't get drafted high, but he got drafted. But then he made a team as a seventh-rounder. He played for the Redskins this year. He had some success in the field. And then you look at what obviously he was able to do the last 2 years on the field with the job that Howard Cross and Riley Mills have done as a duo the last couple of years. There's film you can show of the defensive ends and the success they've had the last 2 years. And like, for example, I know one thing that's been very impactful with recruits, Sean, is being able to say, look at the Georgia game. Watch whose D-line was more dominant in the Georgia game. It was the Notre Dame D-line without their All-American D tackle, without Boubacar Traore, without Jordan Patojo, and with Howard Cross, a shell of himself, because he was battling through. I mean, Howard Cross was playing with a bunch of different injuries late last year. He wasn't the same athlete. He wasn't in the same position he was the year before as a playmaker because of some of those injuries he was dealing with. And so now the proof is in the pudding, on top of, Sean, the team success. I think that's a big part of this. I think no position, people ask all the time, Sean, has Notre Dame benefited from the run they went on? And the answer is a very clear yes. But I think what it also has done is you have seen certain positions benefit more than others. And I think we're seeing that with the defensive line, that the season they had, the fact that the D-line was such a pivotal part of the success the last 2 years to the defense, the fact that they were able to overcome all the injuries and departures they had this year and still play good D-line started to make guys say, hey, look, this Washington guy, maybe he knows what he's doing. And I think that's all of that together has been impactful for this defensive line. And I'm going to say something else, Sean, here too. And Salty Virginia Peanuts made a comment earlier. He said, Brian and Sean and the chat, is it possible that the exit of Chad Bowden and one of his guys forced coaches to fill that void for a time? And that is exactly what Coach Washington needed. I'm going to say this. I do believe there's something to that comment from Salty. And this is not a anti-Chad Bowden comment at all. I do believe that some of the coaches in general, not just Al Washington, kind of allowed Chad Bowden to do more of the legwork than they can allow the people to do now because they're also new. Mike Martin's new. Jordan Blake is new. Myron Tungvaloa-Mosa just got here. And so since Chad left in January to now, the coaches have had to carry the load. And what I think that has done is that I think Al Washington is one of the guys that we're seeing the result of that, because now it's all about him. It's not about, okay, well, we have this agreement or disagreement on who we're going to get, and hey, you go get these guys. I got to focus on this. I think you're seeing that with a lot of these coaches, that they've got to now carry the load. And I think at some positions you're seeing that's why maybe they're not recruiting as well as some other positions. But I do think this too, and it also wouldn't shock me if Al Washington was aware of some of the criticism that's been lobbed his way from a recruiting standpoint the last couple of years too. But we've also seen trends for Al Washington the last couple of years, where I think some people are still holding on to that first class with Justin Scott and those kind of guys, and we're just kind of ignoring it. Like, they got Boubacar, they got Bryce Young, they got Logan Thomas, they got Chris Burgess this last year's class, they got Davion Dixon. I'm very high on Gordy Solstead. People know that. Joe Reef's a good football player. It's been building to something, but eventually Al Washington had to kind of turn the corner and go from putting good classes together with a couple high upside guys and start putting classes together that looked like what the other top contenders are putting together. And that's what's in front of him now. And so sometimes when you put too much onto a recruiting coordinator, but you're also still trying to be involved, it can create to where people are moving in different directions. And I think we saw that a little bit the last couple of years, where now it's like, okay, Wash is like, hey, we're going out and getting the guys that I want now. And that's it. So there's no, like, the recruiting coordinator wants him to be focusing on this kid, but he's focusing on this kid. And then there's all this stuff. It's, I'm going out to get the guys that I want. And I think all those things add up together, Sean. On-field success at D-line, bigger picture, overall team success. Washington really feeling like maybe there's a little something he needs to show people and prove to people that the narratives about him maybe are a little bit off. And there's just all these different things. And on top of that, it is a loaded defensive line class that I think Notre Dame is looking to take advantage of as well. And so this gets us to here, where we are right now. And where we are right now is a stretch of 2 weeks that could then lead to a stretch of 2 months where Notre Dame could completely change their fortunes when it comes to defensive line recruiting. We talked about the Ebenezer Iwatade commitment this past weekend. Rodney Dunham announces his decision on Thursday. We obviously felt good for a while about where Notre Dame is there in that recruitment. You got a chance to close on that one. You had Dre Quinn on campus this past week. You had Mikael Blade on campus this weekend. You have Tiki Hole and Elijah Golden are going to be making visits again in the upcoming weeks. You're going to get Xavion Griffin-Haynes was supposed to come, had weather canceled that. He's going to still try to make it on campus. Kerry Wilder was on campus this week, which is huge for the staff. They getting all these top prospects on campus was very important, but you had to do well. And the one thing that we can say definitively, Sean, is the intel that we've gotten about every single defensive lineman that is visited is Notre Dame has flat out moved the needle with each and every one of them. And so that was crucial. We talked about that a few weeks ago. You had to do well in March and April to set yourself up to close down the road. And when you look at the defensive line recruiting, there's not a position on this team right now that is hotter from a recruiting standpoint than that, because not only the 26 kids, they just had a 5-star 2027 defensive lineman on campus and Chris Whitehead this past weekend. They had a kid who's probably going to be a 5-star in the 28 class, Marcus Fakatu, that was on campus a week or so ago as well. So it's not just this small number of 26 kids. They're getting studs in 27. There was a D tackle whose name escapes me right now. It's Sam something. Was it Sam Lejeune? Is that his
Sam Lejeune from Mississippi? Yeah,
highly ranked kid that was on campus. Devery Henderson is a 2026, or Devin Robertson, excuse me, is a 2027 D tackle that Notre Dame likes. He was on campus this last 2 weeks. So it's like, dude, they're processing big time defensive linemen through this place like it's nothing. I don't know if right now in this moment of time, if there's a position on this football team that's hotter when it comes to recruiting than what we're seeing on the defensive line when it comes to who they're getting on campus and then who they're positioning themselves to land, really, than the defensive line and what Al Washington is doing with that group.
And what you do also, and you know this just as well as anyone, you talked about the importance of recruits looking at who they're going to play with and who they're coming into the class with in their position room. But it goes even further than that, Brian, when you start to think about how you as a program have to be able to leverage against what the players are thinking about you. They're watching. So if you just get a commitment, and hypothetically, let's just say April 10th goes the way that we all wanted to go for Notre Dame. Now, all of the other guys on the board know, man, it might be 2 slots left for the 6 of us. So now what are they thinking? Like in their mind, originally they might say, oh, I want to wait this out until June. But it's like, if they're really at the top of my list, can I wait until officials? Are these other guys going to wait until officials? And so this is a conversation that you have to have. And now you're changing the dynamic of what Fighting Irish defensive recruiting has been. The narrative has changed because now you're beginning to leverage things based upon operating from an area of strength. And I believe that's what Mike Mickens does best. He operates from an area of strength, knowing because of what he's done and what he's created. Now, every top defensive back, regardless of whether or not they're serious about Notre Dame, is going to be interested.
Right.
And because of that, now he can pick and choose and really prioritize who he wants to prioritize without feeling like, you know, we've had this feeling before covering Notre Dame recruiting classes where it's like 1 or 2 guys, it's like, yo, we have to, in order for this to be a good class in this position room, if they don't get that guy or they don't get this guy, I don't know. And so
right.
in the 26th class, there is no feeling like that. There are so many different combinations where you feel great. It's probably like 5 different combinations of kids where you feel like, okay, if that's the combination, Notre Dame is starting to change the narrative about defensive line recruiting. And that's because Notre Dame is starting to leverage their situation, right? And now they're shifting and elevating the floor of the room as well. Like if first 2, hypothetically, once again, if April 10th goes the way we all want it to go, if those are your first 2 commits in the defensive line, man, like there's no way to go but up.
And you can't get commitment, Sean, if guys don't visit, right? So that's why we're talking about visits. And you can look at and to your point, you look at the quality of the visits. They would always get a guy here, a guy there that was ranked high, but you knew coming out of the visits they didn't really have a shot with that guy. And so this isn't just about, oh, these guys visited. It's what we said. It's the fact that look at where the way that Notre Dame has been able to move the needle with each kid as they visited. I've shared on the board, and I think I shared a little bit on this show, some of the things that Notre Dame is doing specifically with defensive linemen that is impacting how they feel about the team. And so you've got to be able to talk about all of it. And for some people in the chat, well, let's talk about commits. They just got a top 100 commitment on Saturday, and there's another top 25 player announcing on Thursday. You can't get it without this. And here's the difference, John, to your point, which I think was a very astute point, is in the past you had a shot with him in Mikhail Blade, top ranked guy, top 150 guy. You know, if Mikhail doesn't miss his junior season with an injury, missed his entire junior season, he's a top 100 recruit right now. Just flat out. I mean, that's where he was trending going into the 2025-4 season. In the past, it was if you don't get Mikhail Blade, you then got to kind of go down to this next guy who's going to be like down here, more of a solid player. But now it's like, okay, it's Mikhail Blade, it's Dre Quinn, it's Elijah Golden, it's Rodney Dunham. You got to get 2 of those 4. Where in the past it was you had the 1, and if you didn't get that one guy, there's a big drop off between him and the next guy on your board. And that's what's different about this class. Like last year, you had Damian Shanklin, and that was about it. And if you didn't get him, you were like, well, I don't know who the next Viper is going to be. They don't have any really Vipers on the board other than Marco Jones, who they didn't really want. So it's like, so then you got to move Dom Hulak there, and where you weren't originally recruiting him. And that's the things we've seen in the past, where now it's like, look, if you don't get this guy, you're going to get this guy, or you're going to get this guy. You got to get one of these 4. And that's why talking about all the guys that are visiting and the moves that Notre Dame is making matter so much. Because we just talked about the 4 ends on the board. Xavion Griffin Haynes was going to visit this weekend. He likes Notre Dame a lot as well, which is why he was going to come on his own dime, but they had some weather-related stuff that canceled his flight. He'll be back soon. That's 5 big-time ends. You got to get a couple of them. D-tackle is still a position where I think You know, there's a lot more closing that needs to be done at that position than at defensive end. But again, the board looks good so far, to the point where they're slow playing Damari Simeon because of where they are with some other guys on the board. And that says a lot about, now they got to close on those guys. Otherwise, it's going to look like a bad strategy. You know, but with Tiki Hola, they're trying to get Noah Clark on campus. They just got Kerry Wilder on campus, who just went from unranked to like the number 110 player in the country on the new Rivals update. So it's kind of like people are trying to figure him out like they figured Ebenezer Iwatade out, who when Notre Dame first got on him and offered him in January, he was, I think, a consensus 3-star recruit. Now he's the number 36 player in the country. And so I think the evaluation that they're making too, Sean, what we're noticing in this class is they're getting on some guys right now before some other big schools are getting on guys. And I think that's helped them as well, because that has always been where I think the defensive line was lacking. This goes back for years, way before Al Washington. A lot of times, if it wasn't a Midwestern kid, they were really slow to get involved, to the point where, I don't know if you're going to get that guy. Keon Keeley was one of the exceptions, because they got on Keon really early. And so I think that's helped us quite a lot. And that's where they're in a position now where, okay, you got these great visits. You've got an opportunity to really, really close. And that's the key here, is you've now got to close. And they're doing that. Again, they just got Ebenezer Iwatade. Rodney Dunham commits to somewhere. He's picked between Notre Dame, Georgia. Was it Notre Dame, Georgia, Tennessee, I think South Carolina, and Duke? He's assignment in those schools on Thursday. Notre Dame's in a good place there. Tiki Hola is committing on May 10th. It's Notre Dame or SMU. You like where they are there. And then the other thing is, like, that's what was so important about getting that first domino to fall, Sean, because to your point, once that first domino falls, you know, then it starts to kind of, you know, go. So you've got a great board right now at defensive end. You got to close on it. You've got a pretty good board on D tackle, and I think it's going to grow over time. That's one position where it's a great D-line class as a whole. The edge class is way better than the D tackle class. And so that's why I think there's a little bit maybe more patience with the D tackle position than the end position. But even there, I like the early board. So here's the thing, Sean. Go ahead before I move on.
No,
You're going to say something.
You look at the current roster and what we're hearing about the depth they do have at the interior of the defensive line position. That plays into, you know, year by year, you know, how are you developing your board? Like, what are you doing? There's more urgency to go ahead and build up the ends than probably in 27, where you saw the defensive tackle offer the 27 a lot.
Huge D tackle offer board.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. So that shows you that
and it's a strong D tackle class from early on that we can tell, Sean.
Absolutely.
So that's a great point. That's the strategy that goes into recruiting. You can't look at a class by itself. I know as recruiting fans, we do that. We just look, this is where this class ranked. That's why I always do the 2-year grades. But when you're building a class, you know, when I was a recruiting coordinator, and every recruiting coordinator, Mike Martin's thinking about this. Al Washington's got to think about this. Chris Ash's got to think about this. Marcus Freeman's got to think about this. It's not just about this class. So we're going to load up with a bunch of kids in this class, which is a solid class, or do we make sure that we meet our needs in this class, but we're going to really save up the room so we can then load up next year in what is a stronger class nationally? I mean, I've had that conversation with some Notre Dame. I mean, like last year's running back class. The reason that Notre Dame was a little picky on who they went after last year and why they didn't take 2, even though some people thought maybe 2 was needed, and initially they did take 2 early, is because I know for a fact that the staff didn't love the running back class nationally. That's why even though they got Nolan James, there was no push to get anybody else after he committed, because I don't think they loved the class. And they're looking ahead to the 2026 class, which was loaded at running back. So why take 2 in that class? We got a kid we like a lot. The process was a little weird, unnecessarily weird, but they got a guy that Dylan McCullough liked a lot. Now you try to get 2 in this class if you can, or even if you need it, depending on how your current roster shakes out. So you got to be thinking ahead. And I love the point that you made, Sean, because this is a loaded defensive end class. This is a loaded edge class. And there's a lot of hybrid guys that I like a lot in this class that are some of those Riley Mills types that could maybe play D end, maybe move inside the tackle, which is why I think Notre Dame is willing to take 3 to 4 ends in this class. That where in past years, like, you can't take 4 defensive ends. You can if one of those guys maybe is a kid whose body, like a Chris Burgess. I like Chris Burgess as an end, but he's also got one of those frames where he may just keep on growing. And naturally, Jason Onye, when he committed to Notre Dame, was 245. He was 6'5", 245. Now he's 6'5", 310. And he looks the same as he did then, muscular-wise. He doesn't have a big stomach. He just was a big kid that had that frame that you thought he could just keep on growing and keep on growing and keep on growing and then outgrow that end position. And that's exactly what happened. That's what Riley Mills was. You've seen Riley Mills in person, Sean. That kid doesn't have – he's got a very low body fat number. Jason Onye has a very low body fat number, but they're 300-plus pounders because they're just big shoulders, big heads, big hands, big feet, big thighs, big mix. They're just big kids. And you see Quentin Nelson at 340, and he looks a little different than maybe some cats that you see in the SEC that are 340 that, they got a whole lot going on down here. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that you look at, too, is there's a lot of those type of players in this class. And so that's where their focus is on, whereas 27 is loaded a D tackle, and that's where a lot of their emphasis is there. So I think it's really smart strategy with what they're doing on the D-line class as well, but you also can't ignore D tackle, and they're not. And that's why the Tiki Holas and the Kerry Wilders are so important, because you got to close on them too. Right now, the end is getting a lot of the buzz because the commitment on Saturday, you've got another potential edge coming up this weekend. I understand that, but they're not forgetting about the D tackle class in here. Now, here's my final piece to this, Sean, that I'm curious about. If you think it works this way. I'm a believer that football is still a very unique sport and very different from basketball recruiting, in that I still believe, even in the NIL era, there's a higher volume of football players, especially top players, that still understand winning is important, but also, even if I'm about getting mine, even if I'm a selfish guy that wants to get mine, I got to understand, if I'm a running back who wants to get mine, I better make sure I got some dudes blocking in front of me. I'm going to go somewhere where that's going to be good. If I'm a receiver who wants to get mine, I'm all about me, I want to get mine, I'm going to make sure I go somewhere that's got a quarterback that can give me the football and a good enough group around me to take the pressure off of me to where I'm not getting double and triple teamed every week. Even the kids who are selfish, to that extreme, are smart enough, for the most part, to understand, but I still got to be surrounded by other dudes, because then that's going to make it better for me. And I think defensive line is one of those positions, Sean, where you see that is, I don't want to be the only dude at a school, or I'm surrounded by a bunch of try-hard guys, which means every time we play a good team, they're going to be double and triple teaming me. I want to go somewhere where I can play with other dudes. And I think when you look at what Bryce Young did last year, and Boubacar, and getting a guy like Chris Burgess, who was highly ranked, if you can then add a really strong class of highly ranked guys in this class, I do think, Sean, that starts a bit of a run where now future classes look at that and say, hey, man, Notre Dame is now a hot place to be when it comes to this position. And at the end of the day, Sean, what have you and I have always said? Guys, Notre Dame is not 8, 9, 10 guys away. They're usually in each class like 2 to 3 guys away in each class. And a lot of times, one of those 2 to 3 is always a defensive lineman. Last year's class, really good D-line class, they were 1 guy short of it being an outstanding defensive line class. And that's kind of how it tends to be. Where, like, the year before, you got Bryce Young, you got Logan Thomas. You and I were super high on those kids. I liked Cole Mullins as an edge player, but where did they come up short? Inside. It's like that in a lot of years. And so you look at it and say, if you can fix that, you're 1 guy away in each class, and that's what we're talking about this class can be. This could be the class that gets that 1 extra guy, and then even raises the overall bar even higher that could then start a run of Notre Dame having success, because then Al Washington can say, look, I've got the on-field success. Now we've shown we've got the recruiting success. We can compete for championships. We can smack Georgia in the mouth. We can whoop them in the trenches. We can go play with Penn State. We can go do this. We can go do that. This is a place to be. And that's what I think adds even more pressure onto this 26 classes, because this could be sort of that gate opening class for Notre Dame recruiting the defensive line, which I would argue is, if that happens, then what we're going to talk about in part 2 of today's show gets a lot easier. A lot easier.
If that happens now, that is a position defensively that elevates and allows everyone else to be even more impactful. Like, you start getting guys up the middle that can rush the passer, stuff the run, pressure offenses, and direct them and funnel them into what you want them to do. And now you can start to squeeze offenses every week. And offenses come into games feeling like, man, I don't know what you can do. Now your linebackers can just run around. Do you know how many Alabama linebackers, looking back, look absolutely fantastic because they played behind the dudes they played behind? How many Clemson linebackers looked really good on the college level because they played behind behemoths on their defensive line? And then they get to the draft of the NFL and you start to say, yo, what happened? They were kind of good, that looked great because they played behind that week after week. And now, when you kind of get exposed because you don't have all of that in front of you, now it kind of exposes like who you are as an athlete. And Notre Dame has athletes at the linebacker position. They have great players in the secondary already. So now this is going to elevate what is an already really elite linebacker and secondary group for Notre Dame's defense. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about, man, really taking off defensively, which, like you said, leads into like a conversation we're going to have later on in the show. But
yeah, Sean, I mean, you made – look, I would even argue even the great ones need that. I mean, I've used this example many times. Manti Te'o was a great player at Notre Dame. And anyone that tries to pretend that he wasn't, I think you either have a personal problem with Manti, or you don't know what you're looking for when you're talking NFL, or when you're talking linebackers. I mean, Manti was a generational player. But I remember the Pitt game in 2012 when Lewis Nix was out in the first half. And Pitt was just chopping Manti the whole game. They were just getting up to the second level the whole first half, just chopping Manti. Cut, free releases. Because blocking Tony Springman, with all due respect to Tony, with all due respect to the late Kona Schwenke, blocking those cats is a whole lot different than having to block Lewis Nix. In the whole first half, they're just getting at Manti, just chopping him, and Pitt jumps up to this big lead. Man, they bring Lewis back in the second half because he was banged up. They were trying to preserve him, and he plays a little bit in the second half, and when he was on the field, all of a sudden Manti starts cleaning up again. And guess what? That's not a coincidence, Sean. It's not a coincidence at all. It's not a coincidence that Clemson had an elite defense in 2018, a defense where their top two tacklers, two of their top three tacklers were linebackers. And their third guy was Isaiah Simmons, who did a little bit of everything. And that Clemson team, as good as it was in 2018, both of their starting inside linebackers on the team went undrafted. Trey Lamar went undrafted and Kendall Joseph went undrafted. Well, why were they so effective? Because they had I think 3 first-round draft picks and a 4th-round draft pick playing on the D-line in front of them. That's why. A lot of guys can look good playing middle linebacker when you've got Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence and those guys right in front of you playing. And so you are correct. And think about it. Notre Dame hasn't had an issue recruiting linebackers. Start having more success recruiting the D-line, and that becomes a whole lot easier. So I think it's a very important thing, but I also believe that when you start that trend, that future prospects take notice. Well, aren't they worried about competition? Well, it doesn't seem to be a problem at Ohio State with wide receivers. It was never a problem at Alabama with D linemen. It was never a problem with Georgia at those positions. It hasn't been a problem at Notre Dame with cornerbacks. I mean, Leonard Moore committed to Notre Dame knowing he had to deal with Christian Gray, and who was a year ahead of him, and Benjamin Morrison. Christian Gray committed to Notre Dame knowing he had to play behind Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison. And you look at this year's class, Dallas Golden knew that he had Christian Gray and Leonard Moore and, guys in front of him. Mark Zachary already knew that not only had them, but they already had Dallas Golden and Cree Thomas in the class, right? Like, great players, first of all, had the confidence to know, like, hey, if I'm as good as I think I am, I'm going to go play. I'm going to be that guy. But I'm also going to be part of a unit that's going to be really good. You can't avoid me, because I remember talking to Cam Hart's mom, and one of the things that he talked about, one of the reasons he chose to come back for 2023 was a positive of Benjamin Morrison's emergence late in the year convinced him to come back, because Cam got frustrated because nobody throw at him. And he kind of felt like going into the next year, like with Benjamin coming back, like, well, lo and behold, they threw at him even less the next year because of how good Cam was. You know what I mean? But he was a heck of a player. And so you look at those different positions, great players aren't afraid of competition. Kingston Viliama-Asa is not going to not come to Notre Dame because they got Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury, who were highly ranked players the year before. Just like Madden Framo is not going to be afraid to come to Notre Dame, even though they got Kingston in the year ahead of him, and Bodie Cahoon the year ahead of him, and because they got Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury the year before that, and Jalen Sneed the year before that. You get what I'm saying? So I think that this is an opportunity where Notre Dame, with this 26 class, this could serve as the class that starts a bit of a run at Notre Dame if Al Washington can close the way that we hope and think that he can. And then even if he leaves at some point in time, we're going to always look back to this class as maybe having to be the one that started that run. And that's what's the opportunity. They're not there yet. They got one defensive lineman committed in this class. One. But if they can finish and close on this really impressive board, and you look at where these kids are from, right? Ebenezer's from North Carolina. Rodney's from North Carolina. Tiki is from Texas. Kerry Wilder's from Florida, from California. Noah Clark is from North Carolina. Xavier Griffith-Haynes, I believe, is from North Carolina. Drake Quinn is from Georgia. Eliza Golden is from Florida. There's only one local kid in the group, and that's Mikael Blade. That's it. So, I mean, these are kids that are from areas where Notre Dame wants to keep recruiting big-time players, where there's big-time D linemen every year. So I think if they can close the way that we hope they can, and the way it looks right now that they are, this could be sort of a gateway class for defensive line recruiting. Because if defensive line recruiting catches up to the rest of the defensive recruiting, that's going to be fun to watch, Sean.
And like you said, starting that trend is important. You see a couple of North Carolina visitors, they took pictures with Bryce Young. They obviously know who Bryce Young was in that state for years. They respect him. They see him develop. They see him flashing in his freshman year. And this is something you talk about opportunity, because we hear that a lot. Opportunity to play early, right? And opportunity does not necessarily mean that you're starting. Even if you don't play, opportunity is something that you feel because you're being developed to play. And sometime during your freshman season, you're ready to go if needed. Leonard Moore was ready to go when needed. Pre-game, Louisville, Christian can't go. All right, Leonard, go make 2 impact plays. He was ready to go, and he got better. So
despite
it's not
getting
about,
beat several times, Sean, like
absolutely
didn't phase him. He kept making plays.
Didn't phase him at all. So when you talk about Mark Zachary, Dallas Golden, these are guys that are going to have the feeling, because what has been put in place, that they're going to be ready to go. Even if their opportunity doesn't come during the 2025 season, when it does come, they're ready. That's what it truly means when you're talking about opportunity, right? Quality goes in before the game goes on. That's what Mike Mickens has developed, and then that is what Al Washington is going to have to develop with these young guys. If he gets them committed, he's going to have to create an atmosphere where other kids in 27 and 28 can say, oh, Bryce Young played. Oh, Logan Thomas played. Oh, they took the next step. Oh, man, Ebenezer got a chance to play. Chris Burgess got a chance to play. Not comparing snaps, but just having opportunity to develop and grow goes beyond actually getting on the field. Are you going to be ready when your time comes? That's what true opportunity is all about. Because if you're not ready and develop when that chance comes, what's really been done? That's what players buy into. They buy into, hey, this guy, this coach is going to have me ready when my time comes, and I trust him. So that's one of the most important things that I think Al Washington is going to get an opportunity to show, because he walked into a situation where he had veterans and he had people and youngsters that were in development that he could lean on for his first 2 to 3 years. And now that line and his job as a coach is now transitioning. His purpose now is transitioning, and it looks like he's taking full advantage of that.
Because what was one of the things you and I talked about going into the season was we're going to learn a lot about Al Washington this year, because yes, you had the 2 veteran returning defensive tackles. Yes, you had RJ Oben coming in, who we were expecting much more from. But after that, it was, okay, Jordan Patel hasn't done anything, didn't do anything last year. Yeah, I get the Boubacar has potential, and Burnham has potential, and Bryce Young has potential, Junior has potential. None of them have really done anything meaningful. You know, what's your rotation going to look like behind your 2 veteran tackles? Like, he can't just rely on all the guys that were coached by somebody else this year. He's going to have to show it. But then it was even more so than we thought because of the injury to Jordan early and Boubacar early. And because of the fact that RJ Oben was I'm not saying to take a shot at the kid, but he had a very disappointing season when you look at what he had done in past years and what he did this year. Now, I'll take all that disappointment for the one play he made against Georgia. Like, if you were to say, hey, he doesn't make that play, but he has a much better year all year, I don't care. You needed that one play. It was a huge game-changing play against Georgia. So, you're always going to remember RJ Oben for that play. But he didn't give you what you hoped he would have given you. You had all the injuries. You had Jason Onye, who came out and was playing great early, development by him, and then he goes away. And all of a sudden, Donovan Hines starts making plays. Junior Chulamaka starts making plays. Burnham comes back from injury. He starts making plays. Bryce Young just kind of grows steadily throughout the year. Now, all of a sudden, instead of saying, well, we know Al Washington can coach other people's players who were developed by other guys, but can he develop players on his own, basically from kind of start to finish? Guys that he, like there's Gabriel Rubio played for Elson for a year, and Onye played for a year, and Hines for a year, but they were developed by him. Burnham was developed by him. Junior was developed by him, and those guys allowed them to go have the success, which I think changed the narrative a little bit, and I think impacted a little bit. And so now you talk about that success. So he now has things he can point to on top of some of his former players doing well in the NFL. They now have things they can point to say, hey, the development piece can be here. We don't have to rely on veteran players. And the other thing that goes into this, Sean, is Notre Dame's recruiting in a way where it tells me, numbers-wise, they don't want to have to keep relying on the portal the way that they have. They're not going after a couple guys. They're trying to load up with a bigger D-line class. If the more you load up with high school kids, the fewer portal options you have, and that's a good sign for me too. Because I'm all for taking a portal guy to fill a need. I'm so glad they went and got Javonte Jean-Baptiste. I'm really glad they went out and got Jared Dawson this offseason. But in the future, you don't want them to have to rely on that if you don't have to. But if you do, it's a plug a hole here, plug a hole there. Hey, this guy maybe was better than we thought he was going to be, so he left a year earlier like a Benjamin Morrison. I don't know that when Mike Mickens recruited Benjamin Morrison, he was thinking he's a 3-and-done player. As much as I loved Benjamin Morrison, I wasn't sure of that was who he was. Now, you knew after his freshman year that's what he was going to be, barring injury. But I don't know that was so that happens too, and sometimes, you weren't necessarily as prepared for that, or maybe a younger guy's not developing quite as quickly as you want him to, or there's an injury there, and you got to go to the portal, plug a hole. Totally fine with that. But when you take the size class they took last year, because you had 5, right? You had Burgess, Reef, Davion, Hulack, and Gordy Solstead. You're going to take minimum 5 this year. That tells me, and I won't be shocked if they get to 6. I'd be a little surprised if they went past 6, but I think they would like 5 to 6. That tells me they're trying to build their lines through high school recruiting, and that is a great sign, in my opinion. That's where Notre Dame has to do it. because the guys, it gets really expensive to go into the portal and get a D tackle. That's an elite player, or a defensive end. That's an elite player. Really hard, and you get them for 1 year. So I like the way they're going about it, Sean.
Love it. Gotta close. Gotta
That's
close.
It. That's it.
Gotta close.
That's it. We'll have a better sense of that by Thursday, right? And then I'm very curious to hear, like, one of the things we're going to do with our recruiting coverage is we're going to be following up with a lot of these defensive end commits or recruits and be like, so what does this mean for you if they're able to get Rodney Dunham on Thursday? And so we'll definitely have some shows about that moving forward. But yes, closing is the key. But you've got to do well to get kids on campus, and you got to do well during the visits to be in position to close. As we talked about at the beginning of this whole spring recruiting period, we said, look, you got to get these on campus, kids on campus, and you have to then show them the future and how you can develop them on and off the field. And so far, they've done a great job on that. Now it's taking those next steps. Because the other thing, too, is schools that like Ebenezer Iwatati and schools that like Rodney Dunham are not going to stop recruiting them.
No.
Right. So they don't strike me as kids that are going to flip, but Keon Keeley didn't strike me that way early on either. So this is going to be a dogfight all the way until December, but Notre Dame has done a tremendous job so far with these guys. So yeah, it's a great place to be. So that's going to be it for today, for part 1 of today's show, Sean. We'll get to part 2 next here, but do us a favor, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review if you're listening via whatever podcast platform you listen to. But as always, Sean, if they want all the latest recruiting updates that you guys are putting up, that we're putting up, all the intel that I'm putting up, all the football analysis that we do, all the great conversation we have, the place for that is at boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's the place to go to get all that. And it's also the best way that you can support what we're doing here at Irish Breakdown. So you can find that, again, at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So part 2 of today's show, Sean. So we do RTCF. R stands for recruiting. T refers to the Notre Dame team. And so the topic that we're going to talk about today is something that you brought up to me 2 weeks ago. We were going to talk about it last week, but the Storms decided they wanted to make it to where I couldn't do the show last week. And the topic is this. We've kind of talked about it in other ways, but you look at college football, and it's cyclical with top teams. I mean, there's times when certain teams aren't good for a long time, and then they kind of emerge and break out. I mean, there was a period of decades where Ohio State was always a really good team, but they were never a real title contender. You had that couple year stretch under John Cooper, but even then, you always knew they were going to find a way to win. I mean, John Cooper was Clemsoning before Clemsoning became a Clemsoning thing. You know what I mean? Like, they were going to find a way to lose to one of the Michigan schools, right? And then the 1 year he beats Michigan, they lose at home to Michigan State. You know, I mean, it just – but outside of – they were always a really good team, but they were never like an elite team. They were never Penn State. They were never that. And then all of a sudden, Jim Tressel comes in and changes things. And really, since he's been here, they're just – every year the expectation is that Ohio State's going to have a chance to play for a title. You know, Alabama for a long time. I mean, you had that 1 year under Gene Stallings in 1990. Was it 1992? 91 or 92, where they were really good, but they weren't great before that. They weren't necessarily great after that. They were a good program for a while, but they weren't an elite program. And then all of a sudden, Nick Saban comes in and changes everything. Clemson was a program that hadn't won a title since 1981 under Danny Ford. They had been a good team, but they were never a team where like, hey, Clemson's got screwed out of the title this year. It goes on, and then all of a sudden Dabo comes along and Clemson becomes a thing, and they're talented, but then they get the Orange Bowls, but then they get blown out by West Virginia. They give up 70 in an Orange Bowl to West Virginia, which just negates all the success from the season. And then all of a sudden Dabo starts to turn it around, and Taj Boyd comes in and helps with that, and then eventually they kind of get the thing going, and now Clemson for a period of time was considered a team that you look at and say, that's a contender. I mean, every year from 2016 to 2020, every year you thought that Clemson team going to have a shot to win it all this year. Georgia hadn't won a title since 1980, and then Kirby Smart gets them rolling, right? So you have these cycles, and then those teams fall out of cycles. Clemson right now is kind of out of that cycle a little bit. And so now you look at it, Sean, and you say, okay, what about this Notre Dame 2024 season? because almost every cycle of success started with a year where they had a lead-in year for it, with a few exceptions. I think Tressel won a title in his first or second year, right? But there wasn't sort of that. Yeah, actually, was it his first year or was it his second year? I'm looking that up. That Tressel won the title. It was the second year, wasn't it? Or am I misremembering that? Yeah, it was the second year. But they went 7-5 the year before. So like their kick the door down moment ended with the title. Clemson's did not. Georgia's did not. Alabama's did not, because Alabama had that really good year in 2008 where they were undefeated going into the SEC title game, got beat by Florida, then got beat by Utah. So like they had that year of building to where now you knew that next year Alabama was a team to watch that next season. There have been other years where teams have that great run and then they falter. Oregon in 2014, great team, gets to the national title game, and then after that, under Mark Helfrich, they faltered, and they just weren't that team again, and really still aren't. I mean, they get a lot of hype, but I mean, they still haven't won a big game. I mean, you look at this past year, yeah, they were the number one seed, they made it to the college football playoff, but then they get blown out in the first round of the playoff, right? I mean, you look at Mark Helfrich, they go 13-2. They make it to the national title game with Marcus Mariota. They drop to 8-4 or 9-4 the next year. And then the year after that, they're 4-8 and he's out of a job. I mean, so we saw what Washington did under Chris Peterson in 2016. They had that great run. They go all the way to the college football playoff. They didn't fall off after that. I mean, they were still good, but they were never that good again. They went 10-3 the next year, 10-4 the next year, then 8-5, and then he retires. You know, we saw Michigan State go to the championship in 2015, beat that loaded Ohio State team, or win the Big Ten title, get to the college football playoff, get blown out by Bama, and they haven't been heard from since. Not as any kind of real type of contender. So you have these different directions that teams go when they have seasons like this. TCU, obviously, I think is the most recent. You know, they had that great run in 2022, and they just haven't been able to build on it. They took some big steps back afterwards. So what is it going to be for Notre Dame, Sean? We say all that to say, what is it going to be for Notre Dame? What will the 24 season be for Notre Dame? And there's several different ways to look at it. We'll get into those, Sean. But that's where I think that we can look at this team, whatever we think this team is going to be. I do think one thing that we can all agree on with this, Sean, is that this 25 season is going to be very telling to us about whether Notre Dame is a team that's going to build on what they did last year, or if they just had a flash in the pan season where they took advantage of a year where we have said was a down year across college football. A lot of the top teams weren't as good as they had been in the past. Did Notre Dame take advantage of that? And they're going to kind of fall back to what they've been, good but not elite? Or is this just the beginning of things to come? I know what our opinion, Pete, we all as fans have opinions, but we're going to learn about it. This season to me is going to be very, very telling towards what that's going to be.
And I think, first of all, identify where you are, right? Marcus Freeman said it, be where your feet are planted. He said that recently, and that's where they are in the program. And so one of the things you point to, we can isolate positionally, that speaking to Clemson was able to move from a guy in Taj Boyd that was able to get them to a certain point and then stack him with Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, right? But on the other side, they also were stacking guys up the middle defensively on that defensive line that kind of aided and assisted and supported what they were doing offensively at the quarterback position. You talk about Alabama. You talked about that 2018 and the transition that they went into. We're going to talk about another transition, or I'll bring it up a little later, a transition that impacts Clemson when they were trying to do what they did, but also impacted Georgia when they were trying to do what they did. But to start the conversation, I really want to, and really the team that made me think about this was Georgia and Kirby Smart, right? Because we saw them lose a devastating national championship game to Alabama in overtime that they pretty much control. Well, Notre Dame just lost a devastating national championship game, not in similar fashion as Georgia lost, but you talk to most people inside that building, they came away feeling like we didn't play like ourselves and we gave the game away early.
They were not just happy to be there, Sean.
No, that was not the feeling. And so now moving forward, this is what we want to talk about. What run or what trend are they going to follow? Are they going to follow the one and dones that Brian brought up? Or are they going to start to trend like a Clemson or trend like a Georgia with a small little breakage for a couple of years? Because it's three different ways you can really look at it. And so you look at 2018, Clemson was 11-3 and 12-2 in 2018 and 19 after that national championship. I mean, not Clemson, but Georgia. That was their record in 2 consecutive years. They got to the SEC championship game in both years, but they lost to Alabama, who was a dominant team, and then they lost to that 2019 LSU team, which is an all-time college football team, right? So they still had another level to jump in order to get to the team in 2021 that actually was able to kind of break through and give us the current form of what we know as Clemson football Georgia football from a culture standpoint. So I want to use what we just talked about in recruiting in this 26 class to be that class possibly. I want to go ahead and talk about this 2019 Georgia class. This is the class in 2019. Nolan Smith, Travon Walker, Tyreek Stevenson, Nakobe Dean, George Pickens. Of course, they got their quarterback that led them to 2 national championships in Stetson Bennett, and he was thought of as just a guy. Kenny McIntosh, the running back, who was a big-time guy for them, their power running back eventually. That is the core of the guys that were able to break through and be part of that dominant Georgia team that represents what we think they are now. So points to the – go ahead.
Here's why I want to stick to this class. Here's why. What was that class? 19 class, right? Mm-hmm. So Georgia won their first title when? 2021.
Is that 21?
21. Because the COVID year, they didn't win it. That was Alabama.
COVID year, we really don't even count most of the time.
Yeah. But they were juniors. That was the class. What's the class we've pointed to for a long time that once that class became juniors, we're going to find out how good Marcus Freeman's recruiting is. Mm-hmm. What class is that, Sean?
23.
It's exactly. And they are what now?
Juniors.
Yeah. And that's where the Georgia comparison to me is very interesting. And so I think that class is very important. But I also that's also why I look at Clemson, because Clemson had they had their own unique build too. Because I look at it, I'm like, well, Clemson and Georgia are different because Clemson really had they arrived on a 2-year span. Like year 1, they get there, year 2, they win the title. But if you really go back and look at it, they actually kind of grew to that over a course of 3 seasons. Mm-hmm. And it was really year 4 of that stretch. So after they lose in 2011 in the Fiesta Bowl, it was 12, 13, 14, 15 is when things started to kind of change a little bit, right? 12, you beat LSU in a bowl game in the Peach Bowl. 13, you beat Ohio State in the bowl game in the Orange Bowl. Mm-hmm. 14, you have the year where Deshaun shows up, and then boom, he kind of gets you over the hump. So there's always been a 3 or 4 year build for teams, and you kind of saw that with Notre Dame 2 years ago with a 10-3, and then last year the different thing there. But there was that class that you could point to that served as that's the group that got them over the top. You look at Notre Dame's 2012 run. It was the 09 class. Now, they were seniors. It was Manti, Tyler Eifert, Zach Martin, Zeke Mata. It was Chris Watt. It was that class that led the way. Now, there were some young guys that helped, some fifth years that helped. There's that one class that is that. And that's what's interesting about this Notre Dame team, Sean, because it is that 23 class that we're expecting to say if they're going to be a team that can get to that point, it's going to be that class. Well, who was in that class? Kenny Minchie, who's battling for a starting quarterback job. It's Jeremiah Love, who you're expecting to be your star on offense. It's Jaden Greathouse. It's KK Smith. It's Jordan Faison. It's Sullivan Absher, Charles Jagasol, Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, going to be counted on Bubakar, Armel Mukum, Adon Schuler, and Christian Gray. A big chunk of your football team is made up of that class. That's got to be – we would not be shocked if 3 or 4 of the team captains this season are from that class. And so can this class be the class that leads that? And that's going to tell us, right, Sean, if Notre Dame can be that team that uses that great run to eventually kick the door down. That's what we're going to learn a lot about this year. And so when I look at it, Sean, that's one of the first questions is, can this 23 class do for Notre Dame what that 19 class did for Clemson? Or for Georgia. That's what I really want to see. And if you also look at it, you could also make that same case about Ohio State. When you look at Ohio State, what was it? Their 22 class? 22, 23, 20. No, it'd be the 21 class. Wouldn't it be Ohio State's 21 class? If I'm remembering this correctly. Give me a second, Sean. I'm gonna look up this class. For this past year's team, their 2021 class, which had you had JT, Emeka,
No, that would be the 22 class,
Tyleik
right?
Williams. 21 class had JT, Emeka, Tyleik Williams, Jordan Hancock, Denzel Burke, Travion Henderson. You had Donovan Jackson. You had Marvin Harrison Jr. kind of helped. Jack Sawyer. Like that, a big chunk of your team, like the stars of your team came
But they were
from
seniors, right?
Correct.
Right.
But it was that class that led the way. For Notre Dame in 12, it was a senior class. For other years, it's a junior class. For Georgia, it was a junior class, but it was still that one class that served as the foundation for that team. And 23 is the one that we've always looked at and said that's going to be telling for us about how good of a recruiter Marcus Freeman is if that class can be as good as they hope, and we hope it is. I think that class is a little bit ahead because that class was forced to step up even sooner than expected because of needs on the team and, of course, injuries and other instances where that class fueled a lot of what you did last year on both sides of the ball. So can they lead the way that Georgia class did? That's one of the first questions we have to look at is if this is going to happen, can that 23 class serve as the foundation for it?
I love looking at this comparison because I think it really points to we don't know. We have to sit back and wait. I think Notre Dame is positioned to elevate itself and improve at the quarterback position moving forward. So you start to lean towards the Clemson model, right? They do have some questions when it comes to the interior of the defensive line. There are some unknowns. It seems like from a size standpoint, they have solved some things, but Notre Dame consistently being in between that 120 to 130 as far as the defense giving up yards per game on the ground, that's not conducive to taking that next step. And so now we talked about the defensive line recruiting in 26 moving forward. It seems like that's something that they have identified and they've decided to plug it, via the transfer portal. And with some of that development from young guys coming back, Armel Mupum, Jason Onye. And so we'll see if they can make an impact that way. But for me, like you said, these juniors, who, by the way, were very bold. I remember covering these young men, like a Drake Bowen, like a Christian Gray, like a Don Schuler. They were very bold before they even became part of the program. They were still high school students committed to the program, and they were speaking, we are going to be the group that brings the national championship to Notre Dame. They had that belief amongst themselves. Even though they lost Keon Keeley, even though they lost Peyton Bowen, they never swayed. They never staggered.
That actually, I think, galvanized them even more. Because you talk to Drake. Drake was like,
all the time,
they're going to regret this. They're going to regret that they didn't stay with us because of what we're about to do. It almost like it pissed him off even more. Like, now we really want to go show it because y'all acting like we lost the only dudes that gave us a chance to do anything. I think it even made him solidified that feeling even more is when they lost those guys, Sean.
Yeah. And so when you think about that and how important that belief is, now the question is, if they had that type of belief before they became freshmen, and the question is, who's going to be the leaders? Okay. All I know is the same kids that believed, if that's going to be your leadership, that's going to become infectious because they believe that they're going to do it. And now the people in the classes behind them are going to be impacted by their leadership because that's what they're stepping into right now. That's the season they're stepping into as juniors. And so even though we don't know who the captains are going to be or who the leadership is, you have to feel good about these young men that always felt like they were going to allow Notre Dame to take that next step because of their class.
Right.
And so you feel absolutely amazing. So the Clemson model is something that I'm leaning towards believing, but there is still a pull that it might be the Georgia model as well. Because like you said, that 2020, you push it out the way.
Right.
It really was, they were chasing Alabama, and then all of a sudden, here comes this anomaly that was 2019 LSU out of nowhere. Like, we didn't expect them. And
Georgia wasn't a title team that year anyway. I mean, they lost 3 games that year.
Yeah.
You know, right.
Yeah, but the chase was Alabama. That was the chase. And now, without question, no one has to guess who Notre Dame is chasing. Marcus Freeman doesn't have to guess it. The fan base doesn't have to guess it. Notre Dame is chasing Ohio State. That is the program we're chasing. It's been proven for 3 years in 3 matchups. We got some work to do. But we have some work to do as a program. We can sit here and talk about almost. Georgia said the same thing about Alabama for years. Almost, could have, should have. Until you do it, you haven't done it.
Yeah. Sean, I look at it when you look at, like I said, the like we were talking about the Clemson and the Georgia models, they all took time to build. The question that I have, so this isn't even like if Notre Dame doesn't win a title in 25, it means Marcus Freeman's not going to be building what they built there. But even in 2018, when that Georgia team had a disappointing, I think it was a disappointing season from the standpoint of, they lost to LSU, they lost to Alabama, but those were 2 really good teams that year. I mean, obviously 2018, Alabama was a playoff team. LSU was a pretty good team. I have some thoughts on that 18 LSU team. And then 19, they went, or in 2019, they went out and they lost to that really good LSU team, but they also lost at home to a really bad South Carolina team. But that year also beat a good Notre Dame team, beat Florida, beat Auburn. Like, you could tell even in that disappointing season disappointing for them, their disappointing seasons in 18 and 19 finished with them going 11-3 and finishing number 7 in the country, and then going 12-2 and finishing number 4 in the country. It was very clear that they were no longer the team they were before, that they were a contender. And if you were going to beat them, you better have a phenomenal football team, which 18 Alabama had, which 19 LSU had. And then in 2021, Alabama wasn't as good as they had been in the past, and Georgia was able to finally get over that hump and beat them, even though they still lost to them in the SEC title game. And then, of course, in 2022, they were a dominant football team and blew everybody out. So it took some time, but here's the same thing with Clemson. Here's the interesting thing, the interesting dynamic, because none of this is meant to say Notre Dame's going to follow the exact same path Georgia did and win in X year because Georgia won in X year and Clemson won in X year, because all the circumstances are different. Kirby won in his, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 20, his 6th season. Marcus Freeman's going into year 4. Dabo won in season 9, I think it was. Jim Harbaugh won in season 9. I mean, every path is different. What the comparison is, however, is how you build your team and how you get there. When you talk about Kirby Smart in the path to get to the title in 21, it resulted in Kirby saying, okay, we are not good enough here. If we're going to beat Bama, we can't just be great on defense. We have to be able to score on offense. And prior to the 2020 season, he went and made a hire that led to that success, in my opinion. And that guy being gone is why I don't think they're suffering from that now. And that was the hire of Todd Monken. The defense was already really good, just like Notre Dame is already really good on defense now. Recruiting was rolling along, bringing in these big name guys, but it was the Todd Monken hire that turned things around. For Dabo, it wasn't an offensive hire, it was a defensive hire. It was Brent Venables. where they could score. I mean, Sean, they played in an Orange Bowl in 2011 where they scored 33 points and got beat by 37. I think it wasn't the final score of that game. I believe it was 70-33 is what I think that game was. I'm pulling up the Clemson season in 2011 right now. But they lost to West Virginia in the bowl game 70-33. I was correct. And what was also true about that season, it was just further evidence that they still could not regularly beat their two rivals. They beat Florida State that year, but then got blown out by South Carolina that year. And so it was really that next year he brings in Brent Venables, and that started to change things. They beat Ohio State in the Orange Bowl that year. Defense still wasn't really that great, but they were getting better. And then 2013, they go out, and they were really good that year. Defense, but still didn't know how to win those big games. The two losses they had that year, Florida State, South Carolina, beat Ohio State in the Orange Bowl. And then sort of that next year, 2015, you started to see the defense get a little bit better. Their losses that year were more about the offense because they had the injuries on offense, and then Deshaun was a freshman and all that. And then 2015, they finally were able to put it all together. And then, of course, the 2016 team is the one that put it all together. 2015, they started to turn the corner. So at some point in time, you had LSU in 2019. What was it about LSU in 2019? Did they just kind of have that magical year because they had to make a change on the coaching staff to get to that point. They had to have a philosophical change with their coach to get to that point. I think that's been true kind of at a lot of these turnarounds or rebirths type of thing. With Notre Dame, I believe that move was already made. And we already started to see some of the fruit of that move. And I think that was the hire of Mike Denbrock. So I think what makes this more comparable to Georgia is because Georgia had to make that move, and it was year 2 of that move that truly took them over the hump. So, yeah, it was year, what did we say, 5 of Kirby, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 6 of Kirby. But it was year 2 of making that move on the opposite side of the ball that really got them going. And for Dabo, it was really year 4 of making that move that got them rolling, where they hired in Brent Venables. But that's the thing to me is if this is going to be something that they're going to build on, it's going to be about Marcus Freeman making that right move with Mike Denbrock, which we think it was, but then allowing Mike Denbrock to get you out of your comfort zone. Go watch Georgia in 2020 on offense. You could still see, number one, there are 2 problems with 2020's Georgia offense. Number one is a COVID year. So Todd Monken didn't have as much opportunity for install of his offense. Number 2, you could still see Kirby was kind of reining in a little bit, saying we still need to win playing great defense and keeping the score down. 2021, something changed a little bit, especially once they made the change at quarterback. And then, of course, in 2022, I think the best part of their team in 2022 was their offense. In 2021, they had a great elite defense, and their offense kind of did enough. And then in 2022, but you could start to see the light go on a little bit for the offense that year, Sean. They started to score, 30-plus, 40-plus more regularly. You look at that 2021 Georgia team. They made this change at quarterback. They scored 56, 40, 62, 37, 34, 30. That was against number 11, Kentucky. 34, 43, 41, 56, 45. And then they gave up. They only scored 24 and they lost Alabama. And then they scored 34 against Michigan, 33 against Alabama in the title game. They had to pick 6 to help with that. But their offense started to turn the corner. And then in year 2, the offense really got nasty. And that to me is kind of, that's what I believe that move of Mike Denbrock being brought in could be for Notre Dame is sort of that's really the key. Because Georgia in 2019, before he made the move, you look at those 3 really good Georgia teams, 17, 18, and 19. They averaged 35.4 points per game in 17, jumped up to 37.89 the next year. Although I think when you look at that schedule, they had some padded numbers against teams that weren't very good. and they couldn't score against the better teams, so they couldn't score against LSU. They scored 66 against UMass, 49 against Middle Tennessee, 45 against Austin P. Like it padded their numbers a little bit. 2019, they were down to 30.8 and then took a little small jump up to 32.3. Then they had a big jump up to 38.6, and then all the way up in their repeat year went to 41.1. And you know what didn't change during that period of time, Sean? Their defense. Their defense was still really good. In 2022, they only gave up 14 points a game. In 2021, they only gave up 10 points a game. In 2020, they gave COVID year, I don't count. 2019, that defense gave up 12.6 points per game. 2018, that defense gave up 19, partly because of that late game of the year. In 2017, they gave up 16 points a game. They were always pretty darn good on defense. It was the offense that made the jump. And I think that's going to be the key for Notre Dame as well, is they're going to have to get that side of the ball to play championship football. And that's going to include making the right hire, but then letting that hire do what you brought him in here to do. And that's what I think started to the reason that I'm more confident in others that Marcus Freeman's going to make the right decision at quarterback. Now, again, I admit it. I still got a little bit of that BK PTSD back in here in me that I got to see it. But the reason I'm a little bit more confident is because we already saw him do it. And he did it last year when they started to really loosen things up and let it go a little bit more. And yes, they did it in the regular season against inferior opponents, but they kept that aggressiveness in the postseason. And I think that, to me, Sean, is why I'm more confident that things are going to start to turn the corner a little bit for Notre Dame, and why I think that's going to be the key towards them actually pulling this off and not making 2024 a one-off where you took advantage of a down year, but the beginning of some things to come.
The turnover differential for a long time has been an indicator for really good teams or championship teams. There is also a huge indicator when it comes to average yards per rush and average yards given up per rush. Most championship teams, even Ohio State, they were 2.4 differential this year. Michigan was sitting around 2.7, if I'm not mistaken. You look at Georgia, going to the what gets you over the hump. Georgia in 2019, that differential was 2.4. When they finally won a championship, that differential went from 2.4 up to 2.7. Why? They increased their passing by 28 yards from 2,000 per game. Just 28 yards per game. Just that efficiency allowed the offensive rush to not increase by that much. They only increased from 185 yards per game on the ground to 191. But the opportunities that it creates, is you can look at those incremental numbers and not think a lot. But what did it create in play calling situations? What did it allow Todd Monken to do with those weapons in that recruiting class that we pointed out? That points out big game opportunities. Really doesn't show up when you're more talented. It shows up when you go up against other talented teams. And now that effectiveness and that efficiency on the defensive side of the ball and the offensive side of the ball is what allows you to become that championship team. And so if you go back and you look and you start looking at the difference on the ground and what you give up and what you're able to do per average, that really indicates if you can get to that 2.5 difference. Notre Dame last year was at 1.9. They rushed for 5.7, but they gave up 3.8. So where are you going to shed this at, right? Because Notre Dame might get to 6, might get to 5.9. Where is that other 0.3 going to come from? It has to come from that defensive line getting down to at least 3.5, 3.4 per rush. Maybe they can't be as dominant as Alabama and Georgia getting into the 2s. But if they can get that defensive line down to about 3.4, 3.5, if they do that, Notre Dame stays at 5.7, now you get 2.3, right? So really they need to get down to the 3.2, 3.1 range. If Notre Dame can just stay at that 5.7 from an offensive yards per rush offensively, now they've allowed themselves to get over a hump to hit one of those indicators that says you're a championship, national championship football team. So that's one of the numbers that I look at that I looked at when I was saying to myself, where did Georgia take the jump? Where did they take the jump? Because it's not going to just jump out at you like a sore thumb. Like, oh man, they increased by like 50 yards per game through the air. No, it was 20, but that 20 means a lot. And then you add to it playmaking ability. Justin Bennett was just a far better playmaker than Jake Fromm, especially in big games and big moments. Like you can't, when you add that to the mix as well, Clemson had playmakers at quarterback. They had guys that were, would you say they were better playmakers, Deshaun and Trevor, than Taj in moments? Because Taj was a very athletic.
No, I think they were. I think it was more about. I think they were more natural passers than Taj. So yeah, in that regard, I mean, Taj was a playmaker. Yeah. It's just Taj couldn't put a team on his shoulders throwing the ball against the better teams. Now, like you look at Taj's numbers, he was very productive as a passer. He had over 11,000 yards and had over 3,000 yards every year, over 30 touchdowns every year. But I always felt like in some of those bigger games he couldn't do it. But I actually think more for me, Clemson early on was more about it was the opposite. It was the same argument we're making about the Notre Dame offense, was more about their defense. Is they could score points under Taj. They just couldn't stop anybody from scoring points. And so then that put a lot of pressure on Taj that you had to go and score. And then I think that's why they would tank against Florida State. That's why they would tank against South Carolina, because Taj would put all this pressure on himself that I got to go out there and lead us to 40 points if we're going to have a shot against Florida State. And then he'd make mistakes and you know, you couldn't. I mean, he had Sammy Watkins to throw to. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins. It was the other side of the ball, but it was the same argument though, Sean. It was the same exact thing you're saying. But even then, Taj was a really good college quarterback, Deshaun and Trevor were generational, which is weird to have them back-to-back, generational quarterbacks, where they could kind of take things to a whole different level. And unlike Taj, who, again, I've said Taj Boyd is one of the most underrated quarterbacks of the last 15 years, and he is the one that actually got things started for Clemson. And then you needed somebody to kind of take that next step, which is what Deshaun and Trevor did. They had better defenses, but they were more against those best teams. They could put the game on their shoulders with their arms and legs in ways that I just don't think Taj could. Taj was an outstanding college quarterback. Those guys were guys that projected to be outstanding NFL quarterbacks also. And I think that's a little bit of the difference. So to your point is he couldn't do it in those big moments the way they could. He couldn't be the playmaker in those big moments the way that you're talking about with like Taj could not play Ohio State with that defense in 19 and do what he did the way that Trevor did. Taj ripped up an Ohio State defense in 2015 or 2013 that was garbage, and that's why that D coordinator got fired. Right? He didn't face that 2019 Ohio State defense. That was a whole different animal. And he didn't have the ability to, in those moments, put that team on his shoulders and say, let's go do this thing. That's the difference. You know, and Clemson needed that, I think. But it wasn't just that, as you and I have talked about. Deshaun doesn't win a title if the defense doesn't get better. When you look at how the defense played in 15 compared to 16, it's night and day in a lot of instances. And then you look at the defense that Trevor had in 2018, night and day. Night and day different. And that to me is it was kind of like the opposite side of the ball of the head coach had to figure it out. Dabo's always had pretty good offenses. Just couldn't stop anybody. You know, and that's kind of but also that quarterback thing, it did that. But I think Clemson could have won a title in 2018 without a generational quarterback. Because of how good they were on defense, and because of you had the Travis Etienne, you had Justin Ross, you had T. Higgins, you had, you know, the tight end Jordan Leggett, you had Hunter Renfrow, you had that defense. They didn't necessarily need Trevor in 18 as much as they needed Deshaun in 16. That doesn't mean that I think Deshaun Watson was a better player than Trevor Lawrence. It's just there was a difference in what they needed him to be in 18. That 18 team was different. That was without question the best team that Dabo had, without question. Like that 2018 team could have played with 2019 LSU. would have looked a whole lot different than what it looked like in 2018, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, but that for me, I think the two models to look at would be the Clemson model and the Georgia model of what is expected in the future. I do think the outcome is going to be the same. Notre Dame wins a national championship. When it happens, we'll wait and see. There is definitely signs that dynamic quarterback play is on the horizon. Will it be generational and stacked like Clemson has? That, like you said, that doesn't happen a lot. Like,
that's why I love the Georgia model that you keep. Like, I keep wanting to, when we were talking, I kept wanting to talk about Clemson because I've just always compared Clemson to Notre Dame because I think of the way they recruited and some different things. But to your point, the way the team is built, it's much more like the Georgia model, which is kind of what you're talking about, which is great defense, and you got to build around the quarterback, and then the quarterback's got to play at a high level. It's kind of how Ohio State was in the playoff this year. Their quarterback played like an elite quarterback, but he's not an elite quarterback. But he looked like one because good system, but then he had great players around him. The O-line played well. The running backs were outstanding. The receivers were elite. The defense was elite. And then that made him look elite, where Clemson in 16 needed an elite quarterback to elevate everybody else. And, of course, he had great weapons to throw to. Mike Williams doesn't suck. But to your point, like, that's the thing is you can win with a Stetson Bennett at Notre Dame. You look at J.J. McCarthy and what Michigan did with him at quarterback. You look at Ohio State this year with Will Howard. Like, I mean, the last national title championship quarterbacks are Will Howard, J.J. McCarthy, who was a first-round draft pick, but I think there's a lot of Vikings fans that are thinking like, he might be something that we didn't think, he might be not what we thought he was. And then you had Stetson Bennett, Mac Jones. So last four national championship quarterbacks weren't exactly Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson and Joe Burrow and Jameis Winston and Cam Newton. But what they had around it was really, really good. And so for me, Notre Dame needs both. I do think Notre Dame needs a difference maker quarterback, but they need to surround that difference maker quarterback with a better supporting cast than maybe what Riley Leonard had this year.
Yeah, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. But I think that's something that has been very evident offensively before Marcus Freeman even arrived or took the job as head coach. I think that quarterback wide receiver combination and question and dynamic offense returning to Notre Dame has been an issue for a long time. And, the same thing we hear about Marcus Freeman, whether it's, putting handcuffs on the offense and all. Kirby heard the same thing until he got somebody he could trust. How do you
hire, all same stuff. Same stuff. Mm-hmm. Can't win this way. You got to be able to throw the ball. Same stuff.
He won throwing for $250 a game. That's it. Just $250 a game. He was able to win back-to-back national championships. That's it. And the Notre Dame fans would have loved to see $250 a game last year.
Yeah. Well, they might have won a title this year if they were averaging 250 yards a game.
Heck yeah. No one comes close to Notre Dame this past year if they were throwing for $250 a game.
The second title team passed for almost 300, right? I mean, so like it got better.
That's the bar, yeah.
But here's the thing: they needed that team to be more explosive offensively because of you think of how much they lost from that defense from the year before. So even though the defense was still pretty good, they needed that offense to take that next step, Sean. So to your point is like, but even then, your offense still had at times in 2021 had to step up and help you. But let's be real, they won that title that year because of their defense. Because their defense was really good, and it took a lot of that pressure off of their offense. And the defense had one bad game all year. They gave up 41 to Alabama. Outside of that, they gave up 3, 7, 13, 0, 0, 10, 13, 7, 6, 17, 7, 0, 11, and 18. So like to me, Notre Dame, I don't know that Notre Dame's going to be able always count on that. 21, they gave up 22 to Kent State, 22 to Missouri, 20 to Florida, 30 to LSU, 41 to Ohio State. That's more realistic to what I think to kind of go on a run is. You need a big-time defense, but you got to have an offense that can also go out there and outscore people for you. And that's what Notre Dame did not have this year. Because when your defense struggled in the first 2.5 quarters against Ohio State, your offense kept giving them the ball back, giving them the ball back, giving them the ball back. Your defense is going to – I don't care how good your defense is going to have moments like that. And your offense wasn't good enough to get it done for you. And that goes back to the same story we've always said. Oh, the defense lost in that game. Well, they scored 7 points in the first 2.5 quarters. This wasn't a defensive loss. This was a team loss, but your defense had carried you. You needed your offense to step up and say, hey, we got your back. Until you figure it out, we got your back, and they couldn't do it. And that's like whereas the other, like Georgia could not stop Ohio State in 2021 defensively. Or 2022, excuse me. Could not stop them. Like, had no chance. Their offense had to step up and say, we got you. We got you. And they did.
But, I mean, in that same season, they couldn't stop Tennessee and Hendon Hooker early in that matchup with Tennessee. And it's like, eventually, they figured out how to get a stop or two, and their offense took over from there, which is a far departure from who they were the year before, which speaks to, like, when you really truly become elite, you become amoeba-like as a program. Like, you have the wherewithal because now you believe and you know how to win, that if it goes back and forth, it fluctuates between both sides of the ball to say, okay, you guys need to step up. Like, now our identity is – go ahead.
It was actually the 21 year that Tennessee moved the ball on them.
Yeah.
To your point, Sean, the year that they won with defense, Tennessee came out and scored in their first 2 drives. They scored 2 of their first 3 drives. They scored a touchdown on the opening drive of the game. Went right down the field, 10-play, 77-yard touchdown. Just like butter. Boom, 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 boom. Remember that? Then what did Georgia's offense do? They went right back down the field, 6-play, 78-yard touchdown. Then Tennessee gets a field goal. They trade punts, and then Georgia goes and kicks a field goal to tie it. And then their offense took over with back-to-back touchdown drives. They get the ball back with about 3.5 left in the second quarter, up 17-10. If you're Tennessee, you're feeling really good about it. Like, look, we've weathered the storm. We're down a touchdown. We're going to make some adjustments to get back in it. And the Georgia offense goes right down the field in 3 minutes, and James Cook scores on a touchdown reception, 11 plays, 90 yards. And at that point in time, you're down by 2 touchdowns to Georgia at halftime in 2021. You're done. You're done. You're cooked. Right? So to your point, Sean, you're making the point. That was one of those games where early on, Hendon Hooker was doing his thing, and you had to figure out some answers. The defense eventually figured it out, but the offense kept them in the game in the meantime. And that's what Notre Dame's offense couldn't do this year, and what they're going to have to do in the future if they're going to be that kind of team that can turn the corner. And that's where the Ben Brock hire was so huge for Notre Dame.
They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it against Ohio State because there's levels to this, right? The defense dominated and pretty much set the tone against Indiana and Georgia. They couldn't do it against Penn State, and the offense answered the bell. The offense answered the bell against Penn State, but the dynamic offense and the difference between Penn State's offense, Penn State could not have the same opportunities early to create a really big gap between them and Notre Dame, but they failed to do so because of mistakes. And Notre Dame was still in it. So that when Notre Dame hit the gas offensively, they were able to get back in the game and eventually win. That valley that Ohio State with their dynamic offense was able to take advantage of the Notre Dame offense getting off to a slow start, similar in the Penn State game, they couldn't come back. It was too much for them to come back, right? So that is, Notre Dame was able to answer the bell offensively against Penn State, and then against Ohio State, it was just too much. It was just too much. And so now you want that team. So it seems like they were able – same thing against USC. Like, okay, offense, we're not having a good day defensively. USC has figured some things out. They're hitting some big plays on us in the passing game. You guys have to go ahead and stretch this thing out. They were able to do that, and then the Notre Dame defense was able to close late in the game, similar to what they did against Penn State. And so Notre Dame has that. You see the beginnings of that, to where it's both sides of the ball can play off each other and rise up at certain times of the game. But now that offense has to take that next step to really be able to do it against the best of the best. Like,
but you don't do that if you don't make the right hire, Sean. That's the thing. That's why, Jim, you could say that about Jim Chaney in 16, 17, 18, 19. That was always true of the Georgia offense, but they couldn't do it because they didn't have the guy. They didn't have the guy, in position to have that success. Now they do. He's now got to take that step, and then it's up to Marcus Freeman to make sure that he has the freedom and the resources to then build the offense to be as special as the defense is. Those are the things that I'm looking for here, Sean, to get to the point where Notre Dame can kind of say, hey, look, this is where we're going to go with this thing. And that's what we're going to find out.
The nuance of this, like we said, Georgia really increased. They went from 223 to 251. That first championship, and then they took a huge jump from 251 to almost 300. What was the biggest factor in both years of making that jump? We know Todd Monken. We know it was his second year. So then you see it take an even greater jump. But was it more about Stetson Bennett and his maturation, or was it really about the weapons? They had a dude wearing number 19 that was, we need a big play. We're going to him. Similar to Ohio State. We need a big play. We're going to 4. Yeah. Right. And so that begs the question, is moving forward, is Notre Dame going to be able to find that guy? Is Malachi Fields going to be that guy?
I think the thing is you need that dude to kind of go to. There's several factors that go to it for me, Sean. Number one is, I think Georgia was more willing to open it up in 2022 because they knew they couldn't they knew they were going to be really good in 22 on defense, but not the elite defense they were in 2021. So you kind of had it open up a little bit, number one. Number two, I think the pressure was off too. You just won the title. There's not as much pressure on you now. Hey, let's go out. Now we're the big dog. And then I think the third thing is obviously Stetson Bennett had a whole year starting under his belt. Because remember, he didn't start 21 as a starting quarterback. JT Daniels started that season at quarterback. And then Stetson kind of eventually get there because you started to see it a little bit, Sean, even in 2021, you started to see it late in the year. You look at the average and you say, they averaged only 251.9 in 2021, but you saw flashes of it. I mean, you had let me pull up Stetson from that season when you look at kind of some things he did. But he throws for 288 against UAB, and then JT throws for a bunch against South Carolina. Stetson goes 14 of 20 for 250 yards, 3 touchdowns against South Carolina, goes 13 of 19 for 255 against Missouri. But they were beating these teams so bad that they didn't necessarily have to throw a whole lot. Part of the reason their numbers were down a little bit is because you had some games where they didn't throw a ton. Well, you could argue that's the same thing is true in 2022, but you look at the 340 in the SEC title game. He throws for 313, goes 20 to 30 for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns against Michigan. And so I think you started to see it a little bit where the longer he was in the system, the more comfortable he was. And then he come out in 2022, now that he's got more experience, and then right out of the gate, 368 against Oregon, 284 against South Carolina, 312 against Missouri, 289 against Vandy, 316 against Florida, 257 on only 25 attempts against Tennessee, 289 against Mississippi State, 274 against LSU in the SEC title game, 398 against Ohio State, 304 against TCU. He didn't play the fourth quarter of that game. So I think the pressure came off. But the other part of it, too, is you also had Brock Bowers was now a sophomore, so he had now a full year of experience under his belt. He was a year older. I think, having sort of the complementary weapons in 2021, I think one of the differences that I felt from 20 to 2021 is I just like the pass catchers better. Georgia in 2020 had talented guys. You had George Pickens, you had Jermaine Burton, you had You had Kears Jackson. They were nice players, but they weren't quite that dominant group of players. Well, in 2021, you're supposed to have Brock Bowers, Jermaine Burton, Ladd McConkey was a freshman, A.D. Mitchell was a freshman. You were kind of young there. Brock Bowers was a freshman. Jermaine Burton was a sophomore. And you were supposed to have George Pickens, who was supposed to be a dude. Well, George Pickens gets hurt and only plays 4 games, plays the last 4 games of the year, and only catches 4 passes. I think George Pickens getting hurt and all those young players. So now you go into the next year. Brock's a sophomore with tons of experience. Ladd McConkey's now a sophomore with tons of experience. You know, you've got some of these older players. And then Kears Jackson, who was your leading receiver in 2020, is now your 6th leading receiver in 2021. And you were able to overcome A.D. Mitchell getting hurt that year because you now had multiple dynamic weapons. Your number 2 tight end that year had 28 catches for 454 yards in Darnell Washington, if you remember how good he was. So I just think the experience of quarterback, you were now in year 3 of Todd Monken's system. That factors in 2. Your young players in 2021 are now a lot like we talked about Notre Dame players. Yeah, Notre Dame's a young team this year, but all those young kids played a ton of football last year. Yeah, Leonard Moore's only a sophomore, and Bryce Young's only a sophomore, and Kingston's only a sophomore. They played a ton of football last year. Yeah, I know Drake's only a junior and started for 1 year, and Adon's only a 1-year starter, but they played a ton of football last year because of the long season. And I think that all of it kind of it's never often one thing, Sean. It's like it's a factor of things. And I think that's kind of what did it for Georgia is that. And that's why, you know, will 25 be that year for Notre Dame, or will it be the year where their quarterback has to have a year under his belt? Like that, somebody mentioned that in the chat. I think it might have actually been Insured by Big, where he talked about, look, 25 y'all are going to be really good, but 26 the years to watch because you're going to have year 2 of a quarterback. It could be that. But my point is whether they win it all or not this year, how they perform, meaning staying on that level as a team and then starting to make more strides on offense is going to be the thing that tells us if this team is truly about to kick down the door. And that's why I don't think a title needs to happen in 25 for this to be true, for us to feel like, right? It just has to be that thing that kind of says, hey, let's kick down that door. We are that team. We are that program. Let's go do it. And I think for a lot of those teams, you look at it, it was a process to get to that team that won the title. How many disappointments did that great senior class in Ohio State have to go through before they finally figured out how to get the thing done?
Yeah, because one thing that doesn't change regardless, Brian, is the purpose, right? I mean, we know, we are believers. So, it's real to us when we read all good things come together to the good of them that love and are called according to his purpose, right? Like, we believe that. But from a football standpoint, what you're explaining is in order for that to take a jump, it's a lot of factors, right? You go back to 24, like, it was not just one area to point to. Like, you can point at the quarterback, wide receivers, offensive line, tight end, everybody. Like, it wasn't working together. So it wasn't good, or it wasn't good enough. All right. And so now this is what we're talking. At some point, it's going to work together. All things are going to work together to lead to that purpose of an international championship, right? And so will it be 25? We don't know. Will it be 26? We don't know. But we believe that we're starting to see the offensive line come together, right? We start to see the running backs that have always been there and that are going to continue to be there. We feel like there are a lot of good things in the current wide receiver room that can come together this year. And we'll see how recruiting in 26 and 27 tries to continue that trend. But this is what we're talking about. Things are starting to come together offensively, and Mike Denbrock being at the helm of everything and Marcus Freeman entrusting him with that, you start to feel good that eventually, that national championship is in the near future. But it's just a great discussion to really have. Like, when it's going to be, what model is it going to be after? Is it going to be Clemson? Is it going to be Georgia? We don't have or don't foresee a COVID year, that Georgia had to weather that pushed them back. Maybe they win in 20 if they have a full offseason, full year. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So it's going to be very interesting. I tell people all the time, will the Notre Dame quarterbacks be 220 yard per game guys as first time starters, or will they be 250 yard per game guys?
But I think what you're saying is why I don't think Georgia would have won in 2020. Like, there's no way Georgia's going to be able to score with Alabama in 2020 when their best receivers are Kyrus Jackson and Jermaine Burton. Yeah. Like that's my point. Even though it was before JT Daniels had his injuries and all that kind of stuff, like they get into a game against Georgia in 2020, Sean, in that first year of Todd Monken's tenure. I don't care how good Todd Monken was. Number one, it was your first year in that tenure. Number two,
awesome coordinator. Yeah,
you weren't going to be able to stay up with that team. You couldn't put it all together. Now you started to see flashes late in the year, right? I mean, last 3 games they went 7.6 per play on 4 state. Last 3 games of the year they scored 45 points against South Carolina, 49 against Missouri. They scored 24 against Marcus Freeman's defense at Cincinnati, but they still averaged 7.1 yards per play. Had 449 yards of offense. They had 615 against South Carolina, 8.4 per play. So you started to see it kind of take off a little bit, but they had no balance. 332 for 130, 332 rushing, 139 passing in South Carolina. Missouri, you saw a great balance. They were 316 for 299. They had balance against Tennessee that year. It wasn't very good. 193, 238. They had balance against Auburn that year, 202, 240. But then they had a lot of games like this. Then the loss to Alabama, 145 rushing, 269 passing. And the loss to in the win over Mississippi State, which was an ugly win, 1 touchdown win, 8 rushing yards, 401 yards. Against South Carolina, they could run the ball, couldn't throw the ball. Against Cincinnati, they threw the ball all over Cincinnati, but couldn't run the ball on Cincinnati. They ran for 45 yards in that game, threw for 404. The next year, I felt like they were a more balanced football team. And I think that was a byproduct of a lot of different factors. But it was mainly a byproduct of the fact that their talent was getting better. They were recruiting better on offense, but they had someone that could put the talent they had in position to be successful. But you can't say it wasn't recruiting and I'm not saying you aren't, I'm just saying in general, Sean, you can't say that recruiting didn't have a big impact on that, because you didn't have Brock Bowers in 2020 and you did have Brock Bowers in 2021. And you didn't have, you had Ladd McConkey on the team in 2020, but he was a redshirt. He was a true freshman that was part of that whole COVID class that couldn't practice and all that kind of stuff. George Pickens was never healthy in his college career. But you go out and you have Ladd McConkey. You go out and then you have Brock Bowers. You go out and you go get A.D. Mitchell. And all of a sudden, you get these really talented players that you didn't have on your first couple teams, because A.D. Mitchell was a true freshman in 2021 as well. And 3 of your 4 best pass catchers are true freshmen and redshirt freshmen who didn't play the year before. And then you had Jermaine Burton, who was, I think, a redshirt sophomore.
That's another dynamic you're talking about. Yeah, you're recruiting talent, but it goes back to the conversation we had with recruiting. Opportunity is not just, man, we're going to put you out there in the field. Are you ready? You talk about A.D. Mitchell, playoffs against Michigan, making plays, right?
Yeah.
Championship game, making plays. You talk about that Ohio State game, a guy that Notre Dame fans laughed at this year in the matchup with Georgia. Well, who do they go to for a big play in the fourth quarter? That same guy that struggled catching the ball. He was a youngster. He got his opportunity. He made the big play for the big touchdown that really turned the tide of that game and got Georgia back in it. So this is what you create. Offensively, you don't know where it's going to come from. But you have that guy, right? Georgia could hit you with multiple guys. Like you said, they had other guys in the passing game that could make plays. And then they had a guy in Brock Bowers that when it got tight on a 4th down late in that game against Ohio State, everybody in the stadium knows who they're going to. Ohio State knows. He gets hit 2 yards before the first down, and he finds a way. He makes the play. And so that is the dynamic of everything coming together to be able to get the job done offensively. And that is the challenge for Mike Denbrock. And I'm glad he spoke about the wide receivers. I'm sure. But like I said, I believe, in my opinion, he used that message to the wide receivers to speak to everyone on the offensive side of the ball. Like, hey, this is going to be the standard.
Right.
For all of us. In order for us to do what we need to do, every position room needs to be fundamentally job sound, no mistakes, consistently This is we have to be where we need to be and do what we need to do in every area for us to take the jump that we need to take.
Because you're not going to have a quarterback in 2025, Sean, that can just put the team on his shoulders week after week the way that Riley did the second half of the year. You're just not. You and I both think CJ and Kenny both have a chance to be special players. I don't know how many times I need to say it. I know who I think is the best quarterback on this team. I've said before, I think it's CJ Carr. I've also said if Kenny wins the job, let's roll. Let's do this. Because he's another guy that has big-time talent and big-time potential. But you're not asking those guys to put the team on their shoulders and carry them the way that you asked Riley Leonard to in 2024. You can't. It's not going to work. They need to be parts. This is the one thing Brian Kelly said well about the 2012 team is Everett Golson's not driving this bus. He's in the passenger seat. Now, sometimes Everett had to step up and make some plays. I think of the go ball or the post route that he threw off play action to Chris Brown in 2012 after Oklahoma just tied the ball game up. Yeah, you had to make some plays. You had to make some. The back shoulder throw he made to Tyler Eifert for a touchdown. I think it tied the game or gave them a lead against Stanford. That takes a special talent to make that throw and make that catch. We've seen it at different times. There was times in 2015 that DeShone Kizer had to step up and make some big time throws and some big time. But more often than not, when you started asking more of DeShone in 2015, late in the year, what started happening? You start turning the ball over more. They start struggling in the red zone. They play like garbage against Boston College. They play like garbage against Wake Forest. They should have blown Temple out, but they needed a fourth quarter comeback win. Why? Because you threw 2 red zone interceptions in that game. You beat a really bad BC team 19-16. Why? Because you turned the ball over 4 times in the red zone that year. Like, you can't ask that type of quarterback to be that guy week after week after week after week, and they are not going to ask either one of those guys. So the talent around them, to your point, has to step up. Well, the running backs can only do so much. You need the tight ends. You need the receivers to raise their level of play to get to that point, because Mike Denbrock knows what a big-time football team looks like. He knows what a championship team football team looks like, not just because of the teams he's been on, but the teams he's coached against. He coached against 2012 Alabama when he was at Notre Dame. He coached against 2015 Clemson when he was at Notre Dame. He coached against 2015 Ohio State when he was at Notre Dame. He coached against Alabama 3 times when he was at LSU, or twice when he was at LSU, including a win over Alabama. And he coached against Georgia those 2 years. He was the OC in 2022 for the Georgia team that smoked LSU. He knows what a championship team football team looks like. And he knows it's not about just putting CJ and Kenny in there and saying, go be stars. They have to do that at some point in time, but you're not a star without, Joe Burrow was a stud, absolute stud. Does he win a title if he's thrown to average receivers and not Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson? No, he doesn't. You put him on South Carolina's football team that year, they're better than they were. They're not playing for the title. You put them in Arkansas that year, they're a lot better than they were. They're not playing for a title. It's about all of it, the whole package. And that's the point, Sean, is you've got to have those dudes around them. And there needs to be, and what I loved about that comment and other comments he's made about the offensive line over the last year is he's basically said, look, there's a standard here, and I expect everybody to live up to it. Everybody to live up to it. You have to be smart about when you do and don't say it. And that's why I think the spring is the best time to deliver some of those messages, because you don't have a game you don't want to lay that message out on the team when they're about to play a game on a Saturday. Now's a great time to do that. And that's what makes it fun. So I think the pieces are in place for this Notre Dame football team. Now it's about Marcus Freeman to push the right buttons. And then the final piece that you talk about potential stumbling blocks, it comes down to when I look at Marcus Freeman, the reality is you've got to be able to push the right buttons. If you can't, this team won't get to where it needs to get to. And this is true it was true for Kirby Smart. It was true for Dabo. Pushing the right buttons means motivating your team properly year after year, setting a standard and holding people accountable to that standard throughout your program. It comes down to when guys do a phenomenal job for you and they depart, you've got to make sure you make great hires to replace them. That's going to be a big part. And then also being able to hold true to your mantra of challenge everything. Because just because you went for it, like the biggest difference, you want to talk about what's the difference between like a guy like Brian Kelly and some other top coaches, is when Brian Kelly goes 10-3 in 2015 and they barely lose to Clemson, barely lose to Stanford, and then lose. He goes, hey, look, we were X number of points away from being undefeated. We just got to coach a little harder and play a little better. And he made no staff changes that offseason. None. And then the next year they went out and it was a disaster because he didn't have the players to bail him out the way they did in 2015. And you got to say, look, yeah, we went 14-2. And let's say this year Notre Dame goes, let's say that Notre Dame goes 13-2 this year or 14-2 again, and they lose again in the title game. And you say, okay, hey, look, we're close. We just got to coach a little better and play a little harder, or coach a little harder and play a little better, whatever. And you're not going to say, well, we would have beat them if not for all these injuries again. Okay, well, are you going to finally examine why you have those injuries? Or we could have beat them if we would have just been a little better. Okay, are you going to examine why you're not better on that side of the ball? Or, hey, our offense was good, but our defense took a step back. Are you going to be willing to examine why you weren't there? Those are the things that I look at Sean, and say he's got to be able to do those things. I'm not saying he won't or can't. I'm saying those are when I was with Vince on set, I called him Trev.
Bro, is it me and Vince?
When I'm doing shows with Trev, I call him Vince or Sean. You know, it's just like it's ridiculous.
You literally could have played a drinking game on the show Saturday every time Brian called Vince Trev.
Yes, you could have been pretty
and everybody would have been hammered.
You'd have been really hammered by the end of the show. But the point is, he's got to be able to push those buttons as the program evolves. And that's what I think, that's what I give Kirby a lot of credit for in that moment of saying, hey, look, this is my guy. Jim Chaney was his guy. They'd known each other for a long time. To be able to make that kind of move to not only get rid of him, someone who you value, but then bring in a guy like Todd Monken, whose entire philosophy is completely against what you've been. That says, hey, this is what's needed for us to get to that point. Now, I think he backslid a little bit, and we'll talk about that in the next section but yeah, I mean, I look at it and say that's going to be the thing that could potentially be a stumbling block for Notre Dame. The only other one is that the administration stops doing what they're doing now, which is supporting the team financially. Right now, Notre Dame is doing their part as an institution for the football program. If that changes someday, that could be another stumbling block. But it really just comes down to now, Sean, is Marcus Freeman's willingness to remain focused on the most important things. Like, look, you're a star now. You know, you're the big name guy. You're the guy everybody wants to hear from. And that's totally fine. Do what you got to do, but don't lose sight of what got you to that point. And that's what happens to some coaches when they have that moment and they become flashes in the pan, or it can happen to players too. You know, like, hey, I had to work my butt off. The reason Kurt Warner was able to have a long career is because he didn't allow that 1 year of success to say, hey, I've arrived. I don't have to keep working as hard and having the attitude I had that got me here. He stayed hungry and kept working and those type of things. And all that throughout the entire program, but at Marcus Freeman at the top, that's going to be the key for him. I'm not saying he won't do it. I'm just saying you have to now prove that you're not going to allow those things to distract you from what's most important. Being the guy that, that your players bought in so much to in the past. You got to be there. You got to be around for them to do that. And that's going to be to me, the potential stumbling blocks for him as they keep rolling.
And that's interesting that you say that, because to kind of close this out, to really, if you're a betting person, you can have this discussion, but just to really look at what we mentioned earlier, who is Notre Dame chasing? And we talked about this. Clemson, I respect a lot because they were chasing different variances of Alabama. Like, they lost to a very run-centric Derrick Henry-led, I think, didn't Derrick Henry win the Heisman that year? Like, that's the first time they got a chance.
He beat out Christian McCaffrey, who had over 3,000 yards of offense. That's how good he was that year. So, and then the very next year, now they're chasing a more evolved Alabama. You went from Jacob Coker to Jalen Hurts.
Jalen Hurts now, right? And so Jalen Hurts is a first-time starter, but like you said, this plays into Notre Dame. Will Notre Dame be dynamic enough around whomever the starting quarterback is to allow them to make that necessary jump?
Don't forget 2018 Tua. Absolutely. He literally had to face 4 different versions of Alabama. His 2017 Alabama team that they lost to was also a very different Alabama team that looked a lot more like one of the old school Alabama teams that you just couldn't move the ball on.
So they caught Alabama kind of like in a shift and at the start of an ascension offensively that culminated in that 2020 all-time offense. Like they caught Alabama kind of like at the bottom of that uptick and got them in a couple of national championship games. And then once they got to the ascension, like Clemson then started kind of like their downturn.
Right.
And then Alabama had to, the next challenge came from Georgia for Alabama. As they started to trend down, Georgia caught them coming down. Right. And now Bama's going through another shift. You know, will they be a challenger to Georgia? Who else in the SEC is going to be a challenger to Georgia? Because we're going to talk who we think Georgia is coming up in the next segment. They still might end up in a similar situation, even though we think they're this type of team. So Notre Dame now.
Can we be honest about something, Sean? Can we just side note?
Yeah.
Can we be honest that if it's not for Clemson, that Alabama has at least 2 more titles? If it's not for Clemson, nobody was beating Alabama in 2016, and nobody was going to beat Alabama in 2018. Meaning, like nobody. I mean, Kyler Murray and that elite Oklahoma team in 2018 had no chance against Alabama. No chance.
No.
I think Notre Dame is the only other team that had a shot against Alabama, but I don't think they'd have beat Alabama as they were currently constructed because I don't think they could have scored enough. Same problem they had against Clemson. They scored more than 3 because that Alabama defense wasn't as good as the Clemson defense, but they would have had to win in a shootout.
Yeah.
And so my point being, like, you were going against a juggernaut and had to go against that. You had to take down a juggernaut to become that program. Georgia had to do the same thing. And you know, that's where Notre Dame is like there are some big time programs that are rolling right now that you're going to have to knock off the pedestal. You kind of did one already. Now you've got another one that you got to chase. And that's
so where do you think Ohio State is? Because this is something else. If you remember that first matchup, Nick Saban was like, yo, I can't stop them. I finally faced somebody I can't stop defensively. So now it's like, that was like his eye opener. Like, okay, now my offense has to go to another level in the passing game moving forward. What did Marcus Freeman pull from that Ohio State loss that Nick Saban kind of pulled, or even Dabo pulled from that matchup where Dabo came up short? Nick said, yo, in order for this to keep going, my quarterback has to go to another level. My wide receivers have to go to another level. What do you think is the one thing Marcus Freeman is? Dude, like you said, you told me you've been hearing he's in a bad mood.
Oh, dude.
Yeah, you've been hearing he's in a bad mood.
He's still in a bad mood. Been that way since January. Like,
And Notre Dame fans should love to hear that. Like, you should love to hear that. But what do you think, as we like kind of wrap this up, the chase is Ohio State? 2 questions. Where is Ohio State in comparison to like where Alabama was? And then are they trending upward, or was that peak for them? And now they're going to start to come down because they have a first-time starter as well.
Ohio State's still Ohio State. I mean, will they be as good this year as they were last year? Maybe not. It's no different than Alabama wasn't as good in 16 as they were in 15. Alabama in 17 wasn't as good as they were in 18. They just happened to play a team that they matched up perfectly against in Georgia in the title game, and so they got that W. But they may take a small step back as a team. They may have a very similar record though, because of how disappointing their second loss was in the regular season this year. I mean, there's a scenario where Ohio State could have a better regular season record this year than they did last year because of the way their schedule is constructed. But they won't be as good of a team as they were last year.
And this
in the playoffs.
This is interesting too. The landscape Notre Dame might be hypothetically a better team in 26 for most people, but the landscape to win a national championship might be easier this year. 25. Because
and you look
at
the
25
schedule at 26 as well.
Schedule and look at the top teams, except for Penn State, most of them will have first-time starters.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. You say, Notre Dame's going to have a more experienced quarterback that year. Well, so will Ohio State.
So will Ohio State. Texas.
Exactly.
The only team that has a guy coming back
going into his second year at Oregon, it's starter. I mean, it's going to be true for everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%
Yeah.
correct, Sean.
Yeah.
Ohio State, I mean, look, for me, I think the thing, what did he learn? What's the takeaway? I don't know. We're going to find that out. What I think he learned, based on some of the things we saw in the portal, is that you have to be willing to be more explosive offensively in all phases of the game. Look, I'm all for. I don't want to turn the ball over a bunch. I will never want Notre Dame to look like Clemson did in 2016. I think that was a unicorn season in which, Bama was starting a true freshman at quarterback. You still needed a last-second game to beat them. And you had a generational talent at quarterback that could overcome those mistakes in a way that other quarterbacks just aren't going to be able to do. They're just not. I mean, if Kenny Minchie is the starter or CJ Carr is the starter and they throw 17 picks this year, Notre Dame's not going to be very good. Deshaun threw 17 picks that year and they won a title. It's like saying, well, let's be like Michigan 23. That's an anomaly season. That's not the recipe for winning year after year after year after year. And so I think look, you don't need a Jeremiah Smith because there aren't many Jeremiah Smiths out there. You don't have to be a team that throws the ball for 350 yards a game. I don't need them to be that, but you have to be a more effective team in all phases of the game on offense if you're going to win a championship. And I think and honestly, Sean, I honestly think the second half of that game is more eye-opening for Marcus Freeman than anything. I think what you saw in the second half of that game is, hey, we got some weapons now. We just got to do a better job of getting them the football and doing some things in that regard, and we got to do a better job protecting them. So my takeaway, I hope, is that, hey, you don't have to go full air raid throw for 350 to be a team that values the ability to throw the football more effectively. And I don't think Mike Denbrock's a guy that cares about throwing the ball 50 times a game either. I mean, you could say, look how high octane and how good that LSU offense was at throwing the football in 2023. And I'm like, they threw for 338 yards a game. That's a lot of yards. LSU this year threw for 315, and they lost, 4 games this year? They threw for a ton of yards. I don't really care about the total yards, Sean. I care about in 2023, they averaged 10.7 yards a catch, and in 2024, they averaged 7.7 yards per attempt. And in 2022, they averaged 7.9. It's about the efficiency and the big play nature of it. I mean, look, in Georgia or LSU in 2023 only threw 411 passes, Sean. That is not a lot of attempts per game. That is 31.6 attempts per game. That's what LSU threw in 2023 with Mike Denbrock. Notre Dame this year with Riley Leonard was at 27.8. That's only like 3.4 more passes per game than what Notre Dame threw this year. So it doesn't have to be a 40 pass per game team. I don't want to see Notre Dame look like 2024 LSU where they threw the ball 41 times a game. I want them to be more around where LSU was in 2023 from a structure standpoint. Now, they're not going to throw the ball the same number of times LSU did and throw for 338 yards a game because they don't have Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. It's not what I'm asking for. So instead of 10.7 yards per attempt, give me 8.7, 8.9, 9.0 on those same number of attempts. You'll throw for probably 40 or 50 fewer yards, maybe 60 fewer yards, but you're going to be efficient, but you're going to be a way more dynamic running team than what LSU was in 2023, and you're going to be way better on defense than LSU was in 2023. So I don't need a remodel or a remake of the 23 LSU offense. I need a version of that from an efficiency standpoint and an explosiveness standpoint that complements your defense and your run game effectively. If Notre Dame goes out there this year and only throws for 260 yards a game, but they're averaging better than 8.7 yards per attempt, they're going to be a very hard team to beat. Very hard team to beat, as long as the defense keeps doing what it's doing and the run game keeps doing what it's doing. If you throw for 250 yards a game, or even 240 yards a game this year, Sean, but you're averaging over 8.5 yards per attempt, then you're going to be a way better offense than you were last year. So it's not about the yards. You've got to be more efficient, and you've got to be more explosive throwing the football. That's what I hope Marcus Freeman learned from that Ohio State game. And if that's what they learn, then hey, I can live with that. I can absolutely live with that. And again, I don't care about the volume of yards. I don't care about any of that stuff. Ohio State this past year averaged 263 passing yards per game. That's it. Ohio State against Notre Dame only passed for 231 yards. They were not throwing the ball over the field, but Ohio State completed 81% of their passes. It's efficiency. And then they had balance in that game, Sean. They ran the ball on Notre Dame. They threw the ball on Notre Dame. It's whatever Notre Dame tried to take away, Ohio State had an answer for them. Hey, you want to come and blitz us and take our throwing game? Cool. We're going to run it up inside of you, and we're going to gash you with some big plays in the run game. Cool. Let's do it. And that's what it comes down to, Sean, is you got to be efficient and explosive. And that's exactly what Notre Dame was in the second half of that game against the first team Ohio State defense. We talk about they called off the dogs. They did offensively. They didn't defensively. And Notre Dame was able to go out there and throw all over them, but then they had lost the ability to be balanced because they were behind so much. But you did show that you can be explosive throwing the football. You did show that you have playmakers, that you don't have to be wide open all the time now to make plays, which in the past at Notre Dame, they had to be open to make plays because they weren't going to win making the tough plays. They didn't have receivers that could do to Caleb Downs what Jaden Greathouse did in past years. They didn't have receivers that could make one-handed touchdown catches with the guy draped on his other side like he did against Jordan Hancock in the national title game. They have that now. They didn't have guys who could make the third nine. I mean, they had guys who could win off the line of scrimmage and get a guy to fall down with a really good move, and the safety comes over and takes a bad angle. And they've had guys who can do that. They haven't had guys who could make that third and 9 post back shoulder catch that he made in that moment. That's what they've lacked. And that's what they lacked a lot of the season, the regular season. And this is what we talked about all last year. Is when you have those opportunities, you've got to make those plays. Bo can't have the drops he had. Jaden can't have the drops he had. Riley had to do a better job of getting the receivers the ball in some of those situations. But you missed too many of those opportunities last year in the throwing game. You have to be more effective in the throwing game. I hope that's what he took away from this, because Ohio State didn't come out and throw the ball 45 times and never run it. They were balanced. Only threw the ball 21 times or 23 times in that game. Was it 23? Hold on a second. It was 21 times. That's it. They only threw the ball 33 times against Texas, only threw the ball 26 times against Oregon. I mean, if you look at it, Sean, if you look at the last, from Nebraska to the end of the season, the Michigan for Ohio State, the two games they threw the ball the most, the exception of Penn State. But the two games they threw the ball the most were their two lowest scoring games outside of the Penn State game in their last 9 games. Michigan and Texas. So only scored 21 offensive points against Texas. That's it. So it's not about volume. It's about efficiency and explosiveness. What I've been saying for years. Be efficient and explosive. And at that point in time, I don't care what your numbers are at the end of the year. If your efficiency numbers are good and your big play ratio is good, I don't really care if it's 240 yards a game or 340 yards a game. With the way that they can run the football, they're going to be really dynamic on offense. And that's the final missing piece, is that part right there. And I don't know that they have the talent at receiver to go out there and throw the way that Ohio State did last year. But I don't think Ohio State had the offensive line last year that Notre Dame will have this year to run the ball the way that Notre Dame ran the ball. So it's that happy medium. And that's what I hope the lesson that he took away from this season is. Yeah. So that's going to do it for this part of the show. We do have one more segment coming up that we'll get to. We'll talk a little college football here, folks. But before we go, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Give us a 5-star review if you're listening on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. But as always, the best way to support what we're doing here at Irish Breakdown, on top of listening to our show every day, is to make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Sean has had a ton of great recruiting content up lately. A lot of good intel pieces, Sean. I kind of chuckle and, hey, did you see the crystal ball? And I'm like, if you were on the message board, you'd have known that like 4 days ago. But hey, it's good news. It's great news. That's awesome. So that's the reason you want to be on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Sean, final segment of today's show is you and Trevor talked about some teams that are ascending when you guys did that RTCF show during the break. And we've had some other things come up since then. And we wanted to get to this show of some teams that maybe are on that run the risk of taking a step back. Now, we wanted to focus on teams that were actually good last year. Like, I don't care that a team that went 6-6 goes 4-8. It's like, okay, they weren't very good last year. They're not very good this year. What are the teams that had either at least 8 or more wins last year that have a chance to take some level of a step back? Now, primarily when we look at step back, like level step back, we look at least two fewer wins or 2 more losses than they had last year. So, I could say, well, look, I think Oregon is going to take a step back, but they're going to have 11 wins or 12 wins but they may have, more losses, or maybe the schedule's not as good. I'm not making that case. I'm choosing an example. So we're going to talk about this, Sean, and we're going to kind of go with one team at a time, and you give one, I'll give one, you give one, I'll give one. And we're going to talk about some teams that we think are on the verge of taking steps back this season. And when you sent me your list, Sean, I said, okay, we definitely have some in common. I want to start off with one team we have in common that's relevant to Notre Dame, and that is Miami. So Miami went 10-3 last year. You have them as one of your teams that is going to take a step back this year. So let's talk about that one first before we get to some of the ones where I have this team, you have that team, and go through it that way. So let's talk about the Hurricane, Sean.
Well, just foundationally, I don't believe in the program that Mario Cristobal has built. Just foundationally, what is your core? What is your anchor? We know what Marcus Freeman's program is all about. Up front, trenches, run the ball, defense. Miami, year to year, offensively, they're dynamic because of Cam Ward, who's presumptive, the number 1 overall pick. You don't have that. And you go from that to Carson Beck, who for all questions, injury was part of that, but it's a great possibility that he would have moved on, and they would have moved on to Gunnar Stockton down to Athens without the injury. Not impressed by that. They lose a lot in the wide receiving core, right? That offensive line, who was really good for the most part of last year, what are they going to be? Because they did lose some veteran leadership up front. They have some really good guys on the interior of that offensive line. Defensively, stout, but exposed by Georgia Tech, in my opinion, and a couple of other teams. Just slow. They're big, but they're slow. They're one-dimensional. The defensive backfield, from a recruiting standpoint, has been pretty good. The last 2 years. But I just don't believe in the program and who they are fundamentally and foundationally. So I think with the step back and dynamic quarterback play, which pretty much, look, Cam wasn't as dynamic as he was. They lose 2 to 3 other games last year.
At least.
They
definitely lose to Cal.
The refs stole a game from Virginia Tech.
Yes. They lose that game but it doesn't get stolen if he doesn't play. They definitely lose to Virginia Tech. They definitely lose to Cal last year, Sean. I don't think there's any debate about that. They definitely lose to Louisville last year as well. I mean, Louisville scored 45 points on that football team. They won that game because Cam Ward threw 319 yards and 4 touchdowns. And, oh, by the way, also rushed for another 29 yards, and they just could not stop that. They couldn't stop him. He went 21 of 32 for 319 yards and 4 touchdowns, averaged 10 yards an attempt. It was one of his third or fourth highest passer rating output of the season. They don't win that game if he's not on that football team. I don't know that they beat Duke if he doesn't play in that game, if he's not their quarterback. Duke was smacking them early in that game, and he just kind of put on a show in the second half. So, I think they lose a lot of games last year, and he's not their. To your point, Sean, he's not their only loss. I mean, they lost the linebacker, the Magoa kid that was a really good player. They lose a lot from their defensive line. They got some good guys. Ruben Baines, a talented guy. Armando Blunt, got some skill. Justin Scott's a talented kid. But they lose Tyler Barron. They lose C.J. Clark. They lose Simeon Barrow. They lose my go-off. If you think their secondary was good last year, Sean, I think we could debate whether it was or wasn't. The point is they lose most of their secondary from last year, and it's a completely rebuilt secondary from last year. I think they signed like 4 corners in the portal from last season. Now, I actually like their portal pickups at cornerback, but they're still all year 1 players. And I'm not a big Carson Beck fan if he didn't have the UCL injury, but he did. And then also, for all the talk about Cam Ward, they also lost a pretty good running back in Damian Martinez, who had a pretty good year for Miami last year. And, oh, by the way, the entire receiving core that he had last year is gone. They lost their top 6 pass catchers from last year, Sean. Top 6. All but one of them is off to the NFL. And Isaiah Horton's the only one who's not, and he transferred to Alabama, which, as I've said before, is one of my favorite receiver pickups of this offseason. So I don't see how that team reloads and wins 10 games again. I just don't. They have some talent in the trenches. I'll give them that. They're not going to have a bunch of bums out there running around catching passes, but they're not. They went, like you said, though, they went 10-3 with all that last year and Cam Ward, and I just don't see them being that team this year. I don't. And I think the thing you hit on at the very beginning is Mario Cristobal has never shown me he can kind of be that type of guy. He's never shown me that he can maximize the potential of a football team. I would argue that Mario Cristobal's football teams have underachieved every year he's coached, including his 2019 Oregon team that went 12-2. I mean, they had no business losing to Auburn. You had Justin Herbert at quarterback, and they had a true freshman, Bo Nix, playing in his first career game, I believe. And then you lost to Arizona State that year. Barely beat Wisconsin in a bowl game with Justin Herbert at quarterback. So even that team in 2020 was to me a disappointing team. You go out in 2021, you beat Ohio State in the opener, and then you go out and lose to Stanford, who went 3-9 that year. You lost to Utah twice and got blown out twice, and then you got blown out by Oklahoma in a bowl game in 2021. A team that beat Ohio State at Ohio State early in the season and physically whipped Ohio State in that game. And so you go out there and you do that, and that, like, when has he ever gotten the most out of his football team?
Yeah.
Never.
And
he'd have to get the most out of this team to win 10 games again.
Yeah, he would have to change his stripes per se to be able to do that.
Yes.
And to clarify, I wasn't speaking to the performance of the defensive backfield. I was speaking to how they recruited the position.
Gotcha.
The last 2 years.
Yeah, they've had talent.
Been pretty good.
Sure.
They've had talent. And like you said, they went out and revamped the entire secondary. So I don't know if that's going to bode well starting week 1. But, I definitely think they're going to take a step back. And once again, I'm going to be honest, man. I think Florida State's going to be on a comeback, and Florida's ascending. No, it can't be worse. But see, Cristobal talked all that talk about the state of Florida last year. And now it's like, okay, buddy, you don't have that guy at quarterback anymore. And these other teams don't have anywhere to go but up or expect it to be better.
You know who does have that guy at quarterback this year? Florida.
Yeah. So you had your 1 year to talk your talk. Now you're going to have to pay the price.
We are going to know by game 6 for them, Sean, if we're right or wrong about him. Because they've got Notre Dame, Florida, Florida State, and Louisville in their first 6 games. And look, playing at Miami, Marcus Freeman knows what kind of opportunity this is for his program. Not so much that Miami's great, but the perception will be there. But they want to recruit that state more. They want to have more success recruiting that state. Don't think if they jump on Miami early, Marcus Freeman's not going to be like, Ed Yost. You know what I mean? Like he's gonna, hey, run it up, leave no doubt. You know what I mean? Like that's what he's gonna do because we've seen him do it. And so, to me, with the fragility that we've seen from Mario Cristobal's teams, they better play Notre Dame for 4 quarters. Because if they come out and get hammered by Notre Dame in the opener, which is possible, I'm not predicting it, but it's possible. 3 weeks later, you got DJ Lagway, then you got to play at Florida State, then you got Louisville. It's not going to be an easy schedule. And then after that, they got to play at SMU, who we'll have an interesting conversation about here in a little bit. They got to still play Syracuse. They got to play at Virginia Tech, and they got to play at Pitt. Miami on November 29th, Saturday, November 29th. And on Saturday, November 22nd, is going to be playing in the mountains both weeks in late November up north in the mountains. Do you know what happens in the north in the mountains in November, Sean? It gets cold. So it's going to be very, very interesting. Very, very interesting to see kind of how they are this year. And I don't have high hopes for Miami this year. I don't. I think they're one of the more talented teams that Notre Dame is going to play, but I don't think they're one of the best teams. I don't. And so I'm with you, Sean. I think Miami takes a step back this season. Let's go to another team that you and I have on there, Sean, that we both have on there. Actually, we have 3 that we both have on there. The next one is going to be very interesting because I'm not as sold on this one as I am the Miami one, and that's Georgia. Let's talk about the Bulldogs and why they have a chance to take a step back because they went 11-3 this year. They're the team that I think is worth talking about because they may not fit the criteria specifically that we're discussing, where they may win 10 games again, but it's still very obvious that they took a step back. But there's a chance that they could be a 9-3, 9-4 type of team at the end of the year, Sean, and they do meet the criteria. But Miami's another team. Let's talk about the Bulldogs because I'm just glad somebody else is talking about Georgia taking a step back than just me because I started talking about this last year.
I'm going to be honest. The argument or the information that we're talking about is really thin. Like if I were a district attorney, I don't know if I would necessarily take this to court. But we can talk about it, right? First year starter. Look at not having faith in Mike Bobo necessarily to get things right. Has Kirby corrected things after losing Fran Brown in that secondary? Recruiting, I thought, took a slight step back. So now we get to see what that defensive line, and then they lost a lot, specifically from pass rush. But, they usually replace guys like that. So once again, we'll see if the recruiting is still in tow with what they traditionally done under Kirby Smart. So it's just a lot the reason why you mentioned Georgia is because it's a lot of questions, more questions than normal for Kirby Smart in Georgia, right? And that is what brings Gunnar Stockton might have been one of their best players on the field that came to Notre Dame, and he didn't light the world on fire. So, is there something there? And he's more in line with, probably what Georgia quarterbacks need to be in order for Georgia to be a really good football team, right? He's more in line with Stetson Bennett than, say, Carson Beck was. Sure. Right? So it might be a blessing in disguise. But with that being said,
when you say that, Sean, what do you mean by that? Like, because I know what I mean by that, but what do you mean by when you say he's more in line with like a Stetson Bennett, a Jake Fromm than he is because if you think about it, some of the best pro prospects that they've had have not done well.
The Easons and that means JT that because JT Dames, but this is a program that is built on if you don't give it away, we'll be fine. We have enough talent and our culture of running the ball, stopping the run, creating turnovers, and being relentless. This is going to be who we are. So if the quarterback can come in and be efficient, timely, and be a playmaker, Gunnar Stockton has more playmaker in him than Carson Beck. Carson Beck was a one-trick pony, and he was a bad one-trick pony because he would come up with big plays, but then he would come up with the awful play to just totally negate what he just did in the passing game, right? The same way he brought you back against Alabama, he'll get the ball and be in position to win the game and throw an awful interception to just end all hopes. And that's what you had, right? Gunnar Stockton is just going to depend on everybody else and be a maestro and conduct everything the way it needs to be conducted. But I just don't know, the composer being Mike Bobo, I don't know if he really puts the conductor in the right positions for it to be sweet music when the orchestra, the offense starts playing. That's a big question for me. That's a big question for me, right? Because we saw second year Mike Bobo. Was it really an improvement? Did you really see what you needed to see? And
No.
he had Carson Beck for another. So
yeah,
that's a huge question mark for me.
It's what you're saying this, Sean, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Because one of my things is the further they get away from Todd Monken, the more they look like. But the difference, the reason I think because again, before Todd Monken showed up, they were still 12-2, 10-11-3. Here's the issue for Georgia. I think Georgia, of all the superpowers in college football, the Bamas, the Georgias, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, the Notre Dames, the Oregons, I think Georgia's the team that's hurt the most from NIL. I think they're the team that has suffered most from the NIL era because Kirby's still trying to run the program the way that Nick Saban did at Bama when he was there, which is just stockpile 5 stars every year, and then they just stay there. And then when their time comes, because they had a kid that started at cornerback last year that kind of got benched, I believe, and then just quit the team, and he transferred somewhere else. And you're seeing Damian Wilson is projected to be, in my opinion. Like, Damian Wilson's after all the losses, after Mykel Williams is gone, Jalen Walker's gone, I'm expecting Damian Wilson to step in the starting lineup and become the next star edge rusher from Georgia. Guess who he's going to be a star edge rusher for in 2025? Missouri, because he jumped in the portal. But you got him because you bought him. Before NIL, Georgia was still buying players, but because the portal was the way that it was, they couldn't just jump back in the portal and get that next big payday the way that Damian Wilson did this past year. Damon Wilson, excuse me. I think people still know what I'm talking about. So that's the thing that's hurting them, Sean, is they keep losing that type of talent year after year after year, where they just can't stockpile players and stash players that nobody else gets because they're losing portal guys that are talented every year. Julian Humphrey's the kid I'm thinking of, the cornerback. And so that's where I look at it, and they don't have that Brock Bowers type on offense that they can put their shoulders on. And their offensive line has not been what it was before either. And so, those are all factors. But you want to know what the final piece of this puzzle is for me, Sean? I look at this Georgia defensive line, and I'm like, it's not going to be terrible, but it's not what it has been in the past. I just don't think the talent is there that they've had in the past. I don't think they have the same talent. Their linebackers are going to be really good. C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, Chris Cole, really good linebackers. Their secondary talent, I think, is actually going to be overall a little better than it was last year at spots. I think Dalen Everett's has a chance to be a really good player. He's talented. He's just young. KJ Bolden's really talented. Those 2 spots will be better, but they got the same nickel they had last year. Daniel Harris is not the kind of athlete they used to put out on the field. And Jonel Aguero's son of the same kind of guy. So, that's kind of where I'm at. And it's just I don't see the talent at Georgia that we've seen in the past. And then you combine that, Sean, with they lost 3 games last year with all the talent they had on the defensive front 7. And then they come in this year and they don't have that talent. They still got to play at Tennessee. They got to play at Auburn, who's going to be improved. They got to play Florida on a neutral field. They got to play at Georgia Tech, who I think has a chance to be a good football team this year. They got Bama at home. They got Ole Miss at home. And they got Texas at home. I think this is a team that could go 9-3 in the regular season and not play for the SEC title and then play in a bowl game. And you know what happens to Georgia when they play in a bowl game, Sean? They're not going to have anybody there in the bowl game. So I could see Georgia taking a step back. I'm not sold on this team. They owned Texas last year. I get that. But if Texas just shows up and plays once against Georgia, we're having a much different conversation about Georgia's season last year.
That's the top. Now you're talking about a team changing its stripes and is showing some fortitude. They're chasing, which is funny because Texas is chasing Georgia. Notre Dame is chasing Ohio State. Yeah. Texas is chasing Georgia. Yeah, Texas is chasing Georgia. For me, a step back for Georgia. I look at the schedule. The schedule is very favorable because everybody comes to Georgia except for Tennessee. All of their big games are at home.
Tennessee, Georgia Tech's the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of their big games are at home.
I think the Auburn games concerns me a little bit, Sean, to be honest
with you. It could be because of style.
And they didn't play that well against Auburn last year. I think Auburn's going to be better this year. Yeah.
Yeah, that's. But for me, a step back would be, oh man, Georgia, because Georgia could have a several. The type of season you're describing is still be in the hunt for
Just
going
like
to the
last
SEC
year.
championship, just like last year,
Right.
right? Because they took a
Right.
step back last year in the eyes
Yes.
of most, and
I mean,
still won the
13-1
SEC.
to 11-3. Yeah.
Yes. So do I think they lose 5 games? I don't. But
Yeah.
for me, taking a step back, if Georgia's not in the SEC championship game, that's a step back, in my opinion.
And I don't think they will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because Sean, here's part of it to me too. I think for the first time in Kirby Smart's tenure in a long time, there's going to be at least 2 games they play this year where they have a somewhat, I mean, and you could argue in kind of significantly inferior roster to the team they're going to play at home. So, like, I don't know that it's a given that they're going to win at home like they did last year. I don't know it's a given that they're going to beat Alabama at home this year. I don't think it's a given they're going to beat Texas at home. The reason that right now I'm betting on Georgia to beat Texas at home is because I need to see Steve Sarkisian show me that he understands this is not a 7-on-7 contest and that you actually have to play physical football and you can't just go out athlete people. But I have a feeling with Arch Manning at quarterback that Texas is going to look a little bit different this year because I don't think Steve Sarkisian's an idiot. I don't. I think he's a really smart football coach. But I think then he was building to me around what he thought they needed to be with the quarterback they had, in the injuries they had at running back, along with the losses they had. I don't think he's going to look at it the same way this year. At least I hope he doesn't. And maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but I think he's a really smart football coach. I think they're going to look a little bit different. And you can't tell me he's going to lose the way they lost 3 times last year, including getting bullied and that doesn't even include getting bullied in the second half by Arizona State in the trenches, and say, we're fine. I don't think you get to where Steve Sarkisian got to in this profession without having some awareness of where your team fell short in those moments. I don't. So I think they're going to fix some of those things. So I don't know that it's – and Ole Miss just flat out smacked them last year. Now, I don't know that Ole Miss is going to be as good as they were last year, which we'll talk about here in a second. But that's my concern with them is I think their schedule is still – it is easier than it was last year. You're 100% spot on that one, Sean. It is because they don't have to go to Bama, to Ole Miss, and to Texas like they did last year. But I don't think they're going to be as good as they were last year either. So those are different things that I look at and I say, hey, listen, man, I'm very curious to see how this football team performs this year with less talent. I don't think they're going to be that much better receiver next year than they were last year. I don't know how much better they're going to be on the O-line this year than they were last year. I think their D-line's not – you're going to tell me they're going to be better on the D-line this year without Michael Williams, without Nazir Stackhouse, without some Jalen Walker, without the guys they lost last year, without Damon Wilson? I don't see that. What makes us think they're going to all of a sudden be better in the secondary? Because they added, what, Zion Branch and Jaden Harris? You know what I mean, from Miami, who played on a bad secondary last year in Miami. I just don't see Georgia being that team. And with Mike Bobo at OC, I think that's the final straw for me, that I think Georgia, until Kirby Smart recorrects, I think they're going to continue to fall back. Recorrects means you got to change your offense. You got to change how you build a football team. Because you can't keep building the way you were building it pre-NIL, pre-transfer portal, because your team is not going to be able to be as successful. You can't just buy players. You got to find guys that are bought in to what you're doing, because the guys that are bought into what you're doing are going to stay. They're not just going to keep jumping in the portal when things aren't going their way. They're going to stay. And that's where I'm at. So I think he takes a step back this season. I do not think Georgia will play for the SEC title. Now, we reserve the right to change our opinion based on what happens in the spring portal. You know what I'm saying? Like, that may change. They may decide, hey, we got to go all in the spring portal if the right guys jump in, because maybe spring ball opened up Kirby's eyes, because Kirby Smart also didn't get to where he is by being a dummy. I wonder how much he's going to be impacted by what happened to them last year against Ole Miss and Bama, and then especially Notre Dame, and be like, wow, okay, we got to do something different. So I'm very curious to see how that happens after the spring. But I have Georgia. You and I have Georgia taking a step back. Third team that we have our eye on, Sean, and this is the one where I think they're going to take a step back, but I still think they're going to be pretty good, and that's Oregon. Because they could go 11-3 this year, be a pretty good football team, and that's still a step back from being 13-1, winning the Big Ten, and being the number 1 overall seed in the playoffs. How big of a step back do you think Oregon takes this year, Sean, and why?
First year starter, second year in the Big Ten for other Big Ten teams to really understand who Oregon is. And I think we started to see that when they went up to Wisconsin at the end of the year, and Wisconsin really dominated that game for 3 quarters. And then the dynamic of that offense for Oregon kind of took over. So that is my concern. You know, the Big Ten catching up to Oregon, what they do, first time starter at quarterback. They lost a lot at wide receiver, some big time playmakers in speed offensively, but, you know, they recruit, so they will have talent at the skill positions. And then defensively, you know, they have some guys up front that are going to be pretty good. They came back, but I'm very interested in that secondary and what it's going to look like for Oregon. I think Penn State takes a step forward, in my opinion, and that's crazy seeing that they were in the semifinal. But I do think Penn State becomes that Ohio State team from a motivation standpoint, where all of those kids came back for a purpose. All of the Ohio State kids came back for a purpose. And you saw Penn State, after a tough loss in the semifinals, say, look, let's come back and finish the job. And so I think they'll have that motivation as a team. So I see them being at best, the third best team in the Big Ten, as opposed to being the best team in the Big Ten. And then if Indiana somehow, some way improves and Oregon ends up being the 4th best team in the Big Ten, that's definitely a step back.
Yeah.
That's without question a step back. And that's not to say they wouldn't have an outside chance of still making it into the playoffs. But it's a lot going against what Oregon was last year and ultimately what they end up being this year. So that, for me, is a team that has a chance to take a step back for those reasons.
Yeah. What I find interesting, Sean, is I think they could take a step back and their record won't reflect it quite as much. Some of my concerns with Oregon are they lost a lot of players, and they're basically rebuilding in a lot of ways, not rebuilding, reloading through the portal. They have some talented players coming back. Evan Stewart comes back. Justice Slow comes back. They got a couple interior linemen come back. Dante was on the team last year, which I think Dante needed that year of growing up as a young man, learning, being out of spotlight. There's some people talking about him, but they're not talking about him the way that they were in the past. I think he needs that. Defensively, they have some guys coming back, obviously, that are coming back. Obviously, you've got Nico's little brother, Mateo. You've got a couple really good linebackers. You've got a couple good DBs, but they're also, they're banking on their interior defensive line being built around Bear Alexander. Really? Your offensive line had some huge losses, and they were disappointing late last year. And I don't know that the newcomers in the portal are going to be able to replace. I mean, they lost 3 really good pass catchers last year. Yes, they have Evan Stewart coming back, but Evan Stewart was on their team last year. And they lost Trayshawn Holden, Tez Johnson, and they also lost their tight end, Terrence Ferguson, who's a pretty good football player. So I look at their defense was not great last year. I love the point you made about the Big Ten having a year of seeing that speed and then now having a better ability to prepare for it and practice against it. Their schedule, the thing that makes me think they won't take as big of a step back is their schedule. They do play at Penn State, but they get Indiana at home. They get USC at home. They get Wisconsin at home. They do play at Iowa. They do play at Washington, and those could be tricky games. But not getting Michigan or Ohio State helps them quite a bit. But I do think they could take a step back, and I don't think Dante Moore is going to be the reason why, but they had a quarterback the last couple of years that I think covered some warts that I believe exist with Dan Lanning as head coach. We're going to see if that's true or not. I think it's unfair to ask Dante in his first full year as a starter to kind of fix some of those things, but they help themselves too. Their non-conference schedule is a joke. You get Montana State at home, Oklahoma State at home, and Oregon State at home. So they don't get the real OSU, so they get the other two OSUs. So, but that'll help them. But I'm not huge on Oregon this year. I think they take a step back. I still think they're going to be good. They may be a playoff team again, but they're not going to look like they were last year. They're not going to be the team that people are afraid of going into the postseason, in my opinion. All right, Sean, now we also have some teams on here that we have one more team, I guess, that we agree on. That's Colorado. Buffalo's went 9-4 last year under Deion Sanders. Really had just an exceptional building season. You have the Heisman Trophy winner. You have a quarterback that's one of the top players in the country. Your team goes from, in 2022, the year before you got there, one of the biggest jokes in all of college football. You're a 1-11 team, and not only were they 1-11, Sean, but they lost by 25, 31, 42, 28, 23, 33, 8 to Arizona State, who stunk, 39, 38, 47, and 42. So their only win was an overtime win at home against Cal, who went 4-8 that year. And they were had one of the worst rosters. The only other win or close game they had was against an Arizona State team who went 3-8 or 3-9. First year they go 4-8, then bounce back and win 9 games. Great job by Deion Sanders. But the drivers of that success are all gone. And it's not just Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders. You also talk about Joe Horn. Joe Horn's kid was Jimmy Horn, right? You lost a lot of the pieces that helped you be successful. I think they're going to have a tough time winning more than 7 games this year, in my opinion. That's why they're on my list.
With this, it's going to be what's the definition, once again, of taking a step back? Do I see them going back to a 4-win team? No, I don't. I think Deion Sanders did and was vocal about at Colorado and what is needed for us to jump into the national spotlight and improve the way we need to improve with the players we have and what we're bringing from Jackson State. I have to build this program outside in. That's just the way I have to do it. Might not be the traditional way to do it, but it's the way I have to do it, because you have to use recruiting to really build the trenches. Like, it's hard to just go out and build. USC, they tried to answer the trenches with the transfer portal, and it's like, you can't do it. That's why they're going out and just, signing everybody in the trenches, because they know this is the way we have to do it. You can't answer that through the portal, right? You can band-aid it through the portal, but you can't answer that long-term during the portal. So now, this is the irony of it. We've talked about, I was like, wouldn't it be ironic if he finally figures the trenches out after losing the dynamic pieces that he loses at quarterback and on the outside? And then we talked about the additions of Caden Salter and then having Juju Lewis coming in as a freshman. Do they allow him to marinate? It's Caden Salter, who's a totally different quarterback than, say, Shedeur is. Does he fit the system and what they want to do offensively, or do they start to shape the offensive system more around his skill set? Those are going to be interesting things to watch. And so I do think that they have a chance to be good, but, you pointed out the close wins that they had last year, some games they could have slipped away.
Yeah.
A couple more of those could go the other way this year. They could end up being a 7-8 win team. And yes, that means it's a step back, but you can view it as a transition year as well. We're transitioning to Juju. Juju is the next dynamic guy. We're transitioning to him. We're getting the trenches better. They have a left tackle in Seaton that I would assume would be much better in his sophomore year. Yeah. As a left tackle, he was heralded coming out of high school. And so he had a lot of playing time, a lot of adversity, took his lumps. Will he be better? I think Phil Loholt is still the offensive line coach there, I believe. And so, does that offensive line take a step forward? We'll see. I don't think they just plummet down to like 4 wins. I do believe they have a chance to take a step back.
I think that was key, because I think it was smart that they didn't just go right to Juju Smith and ask an undersized freshman quarterback, say, okay, keep it rolling. I think it's kind of like what helped Urban Meyer at Florida was he was replacing Ron Zook, not Steve Spurrier. And it was a short time that Ron Zook was there, but he was replacing him, not Steve Spurrier. You don't want to be the guy that replaces Shedeur Sanders, the coach's son. Are you kidding me? Caden Salter, to me, is a guy that can, I think, fit better behind a poor offensive line than Shedeur or Juju will do if they struggle again. He's a guy that can kind of get you out of some trouble. His running ability, I think, allows you to overcome the fact that you're still going to be a pretty talented throwing team, in my opinion. I mean, you're still going to have pretty good weapons to throw to, in my opinion. There are some good players coming back that were overshadowed by Travis Hunter and Horn and some guys like that I think they're going to have some good weapons to throw to. And they've got a dynamic quarterback that can help improve their run game. And their run game can get better without it having to be let's line up and run inside zone or duo or counter or power, and we've got to move this other team off the ball. We've got a guy that can scramble. We've got a guy that can do quarterback zones. We can read zone. We can RPO a little bit more effectively. Whereas last year, Shedeur Sanders had a heck of a year, but people keep calling Steve Angeli a statue. Shedeur is a bit of a statue in the pocket, the way that he plays. And you're going to have meaning like what I mean by statue, Sean, is you knew where the quarterback was going to be every snap. He was going to be X number of yards behind the center. That's where he was going to be. And he could, maneuver around the pocket, but he was not a guy you almost like, if he scrambled, you're almost like, cool, we want you to do that because we don't want you throwing the football because that's how you can hurt us. I also think their schedule is an issue too, Sean. They got to play Georgia Tech at home in the opener. That's going to be a very interesting game. They got to play at Houston. They got to play at TCU. They got to play at Utah, at West Virginia, at Kansas State. And then their home slate is not easy either. They play BYU at home, Iowa State at home, and Arizona State at home, which I honestly would say I'd rather play at Arizona State, at BYU, and at Iowa State, and then get some of those other teams like a West Virginia at home and a TCU at home, a Houston at home, because I got a better shot at winning those games at home, where now those games are now tougher. And the three best teams I play all come to our place, four best teams if you count Georgia Tech, where they can beat us at our place. And I don't think the schedule set up very well, but I do think we're talking about a team that if he can get them back to a bowl game, that's a successful season, in my opinion. And that's where I think they'll be. I think they'll be close to being back like a 6 to 7 win team. And we're going to look at that and say, if he can keep this team together, because there's a lot of underclassmen on this football team at Colorado, a lot of underclassmen on top. Obviously the transfer guys, like, you talk about the quarterback, but you've already got his replacement, a couple of the offensive linemen. But there's a lot of underclassmen on this football team, and their incoming freshman class is small but talented. I could see that. I could see you've just got to keep some level of momentum, Sean, where you have some good wins, you get back to a bowl game. If they can do that without Shedeur, without Travis, I actually think that would bode very well for his reputation as a coach, getting them back to a bowl game without that foundation of his kids and Travis Hunter and all that. I think it'll help that team, help that program out quite a bit. So that's where I'm at with Colorado. Let's talk about your fifth team. Go ahead, Sean. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I just don't like one thing. I think Dion used to wake up as far as portal usage, and I don't know NIL, being in Colorado, difficulties of getting kids to come there, but certain aspects and everything. I can't speak to the fullness of that, right? That we have to dig a little bit deeper. But I will say this. The director of recruiting from the high school level is now at Notre Dame. That's number one. And now they have to replace him. And then the classes were small. The 24 class was like 13. The 25 class is small. So that is a trend to me. Like you're choosing to go small in your recruiting classes and to depend on the portal. instead of taking your medicine, man. Like one of these years, if you really want to take a big jump, you're going to take your medicine. You're going to take your medicine. You're just going to have to go ahead, get young, get that foundational class, take your medicine. This year would have been the perfect. I would have seen this 2 years ago. Like in 2 years, when Travis and Shadur leave, that's our year to take our medicine. We're going to do the best we can with those guys, build outside in, take our medicine, really get a great class in the trenches in 25. And then, from there, we hope to make a jump because at the same time, we're allowing Julian Lewis to kind of sit, marinate, and be ready to go in 26. This year is a missed opportunity, in my opinion, to kind of change the dynamic. Great job doing what you did. You did it the way it had to be done, right? And you maxed out.
You mean building the current team? He did exactly the way he needed it to be done. Yes, correct.
And you maxed out last year. Now, I would have expected more in the recruit class of 25, especially in the trenches. But, they chose to go build the interior of that defensive line, offensive line in the portal again. So we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah. Sean, you look at Dan Lanning is a guy we talked about earlier. And Dan Lanning is relying a lot on the portal the last 2 years with different players to build his team. But here's what he's also done the last 2 years. In the 24 class, he signed 27 players. In the 2025 class, he signed 20 players. In the last 2 years, Deion Sanders has signed 12 and 14 high school prospects. Like that's the point is you maximized what you could do with this football team on the field. You did not maximize what you can do with this football team when it comes to high school recruiting. You signed 3 offensive linemen this past year. You signed 3 defensive linemen this past year. That's it. Like that, to your point, Sean, load up on those young high school kids, coach them up, and then keep going to the portal until they're ready. But you don't even have guys to coach up to get ready the way that they've done this thing. And that's where I think Coach Sanders has made a mistake. But that also is why I have said I don't think he is thinking long-term at Colorado. He signed 5 offensive linemen the last 2 years, and he signed 6 total defensive linemen the last 2 years. That's not the mark of a coach that, to me, that's thinking long-term investment. I would not be shocked, and this is a 100% conjecture, and I'm not the only one that's thinking this, that Deion Sanders is just trying to win as much as he can until Mike Norvell gets pushed out of Florida State. Or one of the Florida coaches gets pushed out.
And he takes Juju with him.
Right. And Jordan
he has his quarterback.
Right.
He has his quarterback.
Right. Exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, you're not building like a coach that's here for the long haul. I don't think Dan Lanning's going anywhere. And he's building like a coach who's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Marcus Freeman's not going anywhere, and he's building like a coach who's not going anywhere. I think Deion Sanders is building like a coach who is trying to win as much as he can in the short term, so set him up for his next gig, which I don't really blame him if Florida State is his ultimate goal. I mean, that's –
because like you said, 7 wins this year would be impressive. It's Colorado.
Right.
Like we're saying, they take a step back. Dude, it's Colorado.
Right. 6-6 season 3 years ago would have seemed like, holy moly, like they're going to go 6-6.
Right.
Yeah. Agree. Sean, let's talk about a couple teams that we don't have in common. Well, at least I don't disagree with you, but they weren't on my list. And I thought you had an interesting one. And your next one is Missouri. Let's talk about the Tigers.
And this comes from
is it because of that big loss of Drew Pine? Is that what it is, Sean?
No, I think, look, Missouri had a really big opportunity, and this comes from me talking to people that know the local landscape of St. Louis, Kansas City, and the surrounding states and surrounding areas, that, the kids like a Jeremiah Love, like a Christian Gray, and all the talented kids like Aeneas Williams, in those last 2 to 3 years, if those kids had locked in and stayed on, we might be talking about Missouri being in the playoffs and possibly in the semifinals of a college football playoff. And so just talking to those coaches and connections in those areas, they're like, it's a missed opportunity in recruiting that now those additions and a few losses to the portal Drink could be in trouble. He could be in trouble. And that is the fear, for high school coaches in that area and, talent evaluators that spend a lot of time in that area that, from a roster standpoint, Missouri might not be as dynamic and deep as they could have been and as they were. And so you might see a step back from Missouri and the quarterback situation. What is that going to be? It's going to be a question mark. Missouri, what we started to see, because they had an offense that was dynamic, and then they came into last year expecting for that offense to take another step forward. And even with all the talent at the skill positions, something was just off, right?
Yep.
And that's offense, man. You just hate it. If anything just misfires, it just throws the entire thing off. And so now I think Drink is in an interesting situation to where the heavy expectations last year on Missouri. And maybe they didn't respond to that quite well as a coaching staff and as a program. Right. And now maybe they go back to like where they should be, on a national landscape. Now they can get back to doing being who they are, instead of kind of reacting to who people thought they were or were going to be. It's very interesting. This is one of those cases where, outside of those conversations that kind of made the red light go off for me with people that are really connected to the program, that's what put them into my, perspective or my peripheral to say, okay, this could be a team in the program that might have missed their window to take that step forward, and they might be in danger of taking a step back.
So 10-3, so that would be 8 wins or fewer. The only reason that I could see this not happening, Sean, and I think it could very well happen. I think they got their schedule, to me, is fortunate. They play Kansas at home. First of all, there's no Georgia on their schedule. There's no Texas. There's no LSU. There's no Ole Miss. The only quote-unquote top SEC teams they play are South Carolina, Texas A&M, which are good teams, and then Bama. They get all 3 of them at home. Now, look, Missouri's fully capable of losing at Auburn, losing at Vanderbilt, losing at Oklahoma, losing at Arkansas, and also losing some of those games at home and having that step back. And I think it's perfectly reasonable. I also don't love the quarterback pickup, to be completely honest with you. I don't. And I think he's another coach that I think your point about not taking advantage of their success on the high school recruiting trail the last 2 years is a tremendous point, because Missouri's been pretty good in the last couple of years, and they haven't been able to get a lot of those top players. So I think that's one that I'm with you, Sean. That could be an interesting one. Now, they did have some nice pickups in the portal this offseason. That is going to kind of be very interesting to kind of see how things go. I mean, they lost the kid, the Williams, forget his last name, but the kid that went to Nebraska. They replaced him with Damon Wilson, who I think right now is further along and every bit as dynamic. I think he's more prepared to help them, but just they've had a lot of losses up in the front 7 the last 2 years. And I think their receiving core is going to take a big step back as well. With all due respect, you're trying to replace Luther Burden and Theo Weiss with Kevin Coleman, and I just don't think that's going to go overly well. I don't. He's a good football player. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that's gonna go overly well.
Like I said, they got good football players, and then I don't want to mispronounce his name because I might get called out in the chat. But the quarterback pickup from Penn State, the backup, he reminds me of like John. Did you remember John Concat got that big deal in the NBA because they extrapolated like his numbers? If he played 40 minutes, if you stretch his numbers out over 40 minutes,
he wasn't playing.
He's averaging a double-double, right? Yeah. And I fear that watching that kid come in with specific packages to help him be successful, and you try to extrapolate that across him as far as him being a starting quarterback, I don't know if that's a dangerous game. That's a dangerous game that you play, right? And so, like you said, the quarterback, it's a question mark. right?
Brady
And when
Brady
the quarterback is right, when the quarterback is right and drinks offense,
we saw that last year in 2023. And that's the one potential saving grace that they could have this year, Sean, is because I don't think Bo Prabula is a bad quarterback. I just don't think he's the quarterback people make him out to be. I mean, we've seen throughout history of you and I's lifetime. I mean, remember when Scott Mitchell got that big old contract? Remember when Matt Castle got that big old contract because they came off the bench and did some things and
it did some things.
Remember when the Bills kept trying to force Rob Johnson into the starting lineup over Doug Flutie because of what he did coming off the bench for somebody? You know what I mean? Like, I kind of feel that a little bit with Bo. I've never been as high. I mean, he's a good quarterback. The thing that's the saving grace for them, though, or for Bo, is he's not replacing 2023 Brady Cook that passed for 3,300 yards and 255 a game and completed 66% of his passes. He's trying to overcome last year's offense where they passed for 225 yards a game, 14 touchdowns and 5 picks. I actually think he can replicate that. And then he can add a little bit of a running fact to there. I mean, Brady Cook wasn't a stiff, but he's not the runner that Bo is either, in my opinion.
Right.
But Theo Weiss and Luther Bolden are huge losses for them. Huge losses for them. So I could see them taking a step back. Although they're one of those teams, Sean, that their record could look better than they actually are because of their schedule.
Because of the schedule,
that it could be that. But I also don't think the game that I've got on my eye that I'm watching them is their second game. They're at home against Kansas. And I'm very curious to see how that game goes.
Kansas might be on a revenge tour.
Rebounds. Jalen Daniels. That'll be before he gets hurt, most likely. That'll be a very interesting one, Sean. I had a couple also. I like the Missouri one. A couple other teams. There are some smaller level teams I think Army takes a step back. I think Boise takes a step back. I think UNLV, I think they all take a step back. We talked about Miami. We talked about Colorado. Here's a couple for you, Sean. I think SMU takes a step back. And I still think SMU is going to be a good football team. I still think they're going to be a good football team. I think they're still going to be a team that's a good bowl team. They're going to be in the top third of potentially of the ACC. Pardon me, of the ACC. But here's my concern with SMU. Number one, it kind of goes back to what you had said a little bit about Oregon. This is now going to be year 2 of them in that league. Teams will have seen them a little bit. They're going to be a little bit more used to them. I think SMU suffered some pretty key personnel losses. Now, they got a lot of good players coming back, but what was so good about them last year, they were so deep. Sean, they could just run 3 running backs out there. They could run 6 or 7 receivers out there and kind of go at you. You look at their offensive line, they lost a couple really good players there, but it's more so on defense. They had a very underrated defense the last 2 years. Like, people talk about Rhett Lashley in the offense and Kevin Jennings and all that kind of stuff. But what people missed is the last couple of years, SMU's been pretty good on defense. They gave up 17.8 points a game 2 years ago. Last year, they gave up 22, and that number got boosted a little bit by their last 2 games because they gave up 72 points in their last 2 games of the year. But what got them to that point, Sean, is the fact that prior to those last 2 games, they were only giving up, let's see here, that's not correct. I put their offensive numbers in. I'm like, no, they weren't giving up over 30 points a game. But if you look at where they were going into the postseason, they were at 19.8. When you have an offense like they have, and you're only giving up 19.8 points a game, you're going to be a pretty good football team. I also think they benefited from just a down year in the ACC. It just was. So I look at their schedule in 2025, Sean. They got to play East Texas A&M, should be a win. They get Baylor at home. They play at Missouri State. We've said this. There was a buy-sell hold about this the last week, I believe. I can't remember who it was, but they talked about that SMU-TCU game. They got to play at TCU. They also have to play at Clemson. They also have to play at BC, at Cal. They get Syracuse at home. They get Miami at home, and they get Louisville at home. I could see SMU being a 9-3 football team this year. And that's a pretty big step back from a team that played in the college football playoff the year before. I think their floor is probably 8-4. Mm-hmm. I think their ceiling is probably 10-2, which if they get to their ceiling, that's a good building year because that says to to recruits that, hey, we're not going away. This is a place to come. We're not going away. We're still a good football team. But I could see them being an 8-9 win team this year. I also think that I think Kevin Jennings got a little bit exposed last year down the stretch of the season, Sean, when you look at kind of against Clemson, especially against Penn State, but even so against Cal a little bit, he wasn't nearly as dynamic in his last 5 games as he was coming into that, because I think people said, okay, this is a talented quarterback, but here's how you can contain him and kind of keep him from really taking a game over. And I think that's going to hurt him a little bit as well, also on top of their defense taking a step back.
I understand why anyone would have SMU as a part of their group of teams that could take a step back. I believe in Rhett Lashley and his ability to build a program. So I compare him to Crystal Ball. I compare him to a perfect example. They brought in 23 kids. They brought in 2 dynamic wide receivers. They brought in defensive linemen, offensive linemen, recruiting wise, but then they went ham in the portal, defensive line and offensive line. Mm-hmm. So now they used the portal. The same thing told Colorado should have done. This is what Rhett Lashley did, right? He lost a lot defensively, like you said. He pieced that together. He's going to piece the defense together. But in his mind, he thinks, we're going to continue to be dynamic at the skill positions, and I expect my quarterback to become even better. This is what he's thinking. Now, whether or not we believe it remains to be seen. Basically, what you just said, teams figure things out. But Rhett Lashley is going to coach his tail off.
But what did he do in the portal, Sean? He went out and got Tyler Van Dyke as a backup quarterback. That's a good backup quarterback.
That's another thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. If Kevin gets hurt because of his play style, you have right. You have
absolutely. So now, I believe in Rhett Lashley. That for me, point,
Sean, 23 high school signees last year.
Yes. Instead of 13 or 14 or 12, like, okay, if you're going to go crazy.
Had a big portal class.
Yeah.
But the portal class, here's what I like about they did in the portal class, Sean. The 2 offensive linemen they got out of the portal, Josh Bates and Addison Nichols, both have multiple years of eligibility left. They got a linebacker that's got multiple years of eligibility left. They brought a lot of the DBs and some of the guys that have on defense are portal guys, but when they go to the portal, they're getting guys with multiple years of eligibility left. That shows me he understands culture matters here. But if I need to go get a one and done to bridge the gap, I'll get a one and done. Sean, I want to say this. I don't disagree with what you're saying about Rhett Lashley. And I think the fact that we're having a conversation about them having a 9-3 step back season speaks volumes about the job he's doing at SMU. They're not a flash in the pan. They're going to go 6-6 last year. Or they were relying on 2 players like Colorado was, and we're talking about them going from 9 wins to 6 wins or something like that. I'm talking about them going from 11 to 9. But I just feel like their margin for error last year was pretty thin. And because of the losses they had on defense, I think that's going to result in a couple of those games that they won by a touchdown, they lose by a touchdown. That's where I'm at.
Look at the way, big picture, building culture, building program. And like you said, Deion Sanders, he is building the program because he's staying there. He knows he's staying there. Deion Sanders is building the program. You look at the evidence, he's not looking at Colorado as a long-term situation for him. But Rhett Lashley, similar to Deion, Ty Hawkins is his next. Like, he has 2 quarterbacks there, but Ty Hawkins is sitting in the waiting. It's his 25 quarterback. Like, this is the guy that when we're ready at every position, this is the guy that we're going to have. And
he recruited some dudes for him to throw to last year too.
Oh, Jalen Cooper and the Dalen, what's his last name? Dalen Singleton. Mm-hmm. Those top 2 receivers that he got. Jalen Cooper, Notre Dame tried to snatch him at the end.
And they almost got him.
Back. Yeah.
They also have a 4-star running back that a buddy of mine keeps telling me he wants Notre Dame to try to go get as their number 2 running back, who's a 4-star kid. You saw, and they signed a 5-man receiver class last year. Dalen Singleton, you had Jalen Cooper, you had Carterius Brown, you had Isaiah Robertson, and then you had Link Rhodes. So, and signed 2 tight ends, and they signed a good running back out of Texas as well. And they signed 4 offensive linemen last year, Sean, as well. So, again, that's defensively, they signed 2 defensive linemen from last year. That's an area like you talked about where they're still going to the portal until they're able to build that position up a little bit. I think he learned too from the previous year where they didn't, they were very, very heavier on the portal the year before and only signed 11 kids and 16 kids. I like the fact that he's used the success to now, let's say now we can go out and get some more, because you aren't going to get top high school players. You're not going to get Ty Hawkins 2 years ago. You're not going to get Jalen Cooper 2 years ago when they're still in the AAC. If they don't make the move to the ACC, the minute Notre Dame comes after Jalen Cooper, it's a wrap. But now it's like, look what we did. We went to the playoff. We were in the ACC. We won the ACC. Won the ACC regular season championship. We went and played Clemson, and beat Louisville. We played this team. We played that team, and now you've got a chance to hold on to some of those guys. So I like what they did, but I do think they take a step back. Here's another team that I think takes a step back, Sean, and I think this one could be I could be completely dead wrong on this one. Wouldn't be the first time. But I think Iowa State was one. Like, I see a lot of people say that BYU, had a lot of luck last year to win it. I don't agree with that. I think BYU was a very good football team last year because they were physical. They've got a lot of guys coming back. I look at Iowa State, Sean, and I think they're that team that just kind of like everything went right for them last year. And they went from, what were they, like 4-8 the year before? What was their record in 2024? They weren't very good. They were 2023. I mean, what were they in 2023? They were 7-6. Lost to Iowa, lost to Ohio, lost to Memphis in a bowl game. They weren't a great football team in 2023. And in 2022 they were 4-8. Then they come out last year, they go 11-3. And I don't know, Sean. I look at that football team and I think they caught some breaks by some teams being down. Their schedule wasn't super challenging. They lost to Texas Tech at home. They got smacked by Kansas in the postseason. They got blown out by Arizona State. They lost their 2,000-yard receivers. They got a lot coming back, Sean, in the trenches and running back and quarterback. But I just think they're that team that everything went right for them last year. And I don't think what they did last year is repeatable. I mean, let's be honest, too. They don't beat Miami in the bowl game for their 11th win if Cam Ward doesn't sit out the second half of that game. And they almost lost to Emory Williams in that game. So I think Matt Campbell did a phenomenal coaching job last year. I think they're just more of a 7-8 win team this year. I think Iowa State takes a pretty decent step back this season. They're not going to have like an Oklahoma State drop off, like they go 3-9 this year. But I think they are a significantly less team this season. I do not view them as one of the teams that's going to compete for the Big 12 title. I think them and Colorado are the 2 teams that take the biggest backslides in the Big 12. What say you about that?
No, I totally agree with you. I think you're spot on with that. I considered them. I considered Vanderbilt. I considered Kentucky. Kentucky might be on a slide.
Yeah,
they might be on a slide.
Worse than 4-8.
Worse,
that would be bad,
man. Or they might just literally stack back-to-back horrible season. Like, I'm very interested in seeing if that shit can be corrected as well. So it's a lot of teams that I, considered, but
did you consider South Carolina or Ole Miss at all? Because I did.
Oh, see, look. I saw someone in the chat say that if Lane backed up this season with a similar season, could you consider him an elite coach? And I'm like, no. Like, you win an SEC championship. No.
Lane is going to be an SEC championship game.
Get 2, right. Like, dude, until further notice, Lane is who he is. He is who he is. So I expect whatever that little area is, I expect Mississippi to be right there. -1 game. It's like, I think plus or minus 1 game, that's what Mississippi is going to be.
Can I say something about that? Yeah. I had them on my list of teams I considered, but the reason that I took them off, I think they're going to be a much less effective team this year, or less talented team this year than they were last year. Yeah. But they so disappointed last year in losing 3 games, that an 8-4 season is not a huge drop-off based on the criteria we talked about.
Because they're a high and low program. They're a high and low program.
Right. They choking that last year's team had no business being 9-3, Sean. None. And this way we say, well, you know what? Like, I don't care what Ole Miss did in the past. Like, if Lane Kiffin would have gone 9-3 this year in the regular season because he just coached his butt off and got the most out of his football team, I'd say, well, it's a phenomenal job. It's not about the record, or they haven't had back-to-back 10-win seasons since when. I don't care about that. When you won 10 games on it with a roster that should have won 12, I'm not impressed by that. I don't care what they did in the past. You didn't get the most out of your football team. How do you say that? You just talked about Kentucky. Imagine how bad it would have been for Kentucky if they didn't upset Ole Miss at Ole Miss. They lost to Florida. How do you lose to Florida last year when you have when they were in a position to make the playoff? It wasn't even like they lost to Florida. They knew they weren't going to make the playoff. They didn't have anything to play for. They had a shot at that time, Sean, to be a playoff team still. If they beat Florida and they're 10-2 at the end of the regular season, in my opinion, they're in the playoff. They are. They're in over they're probably in over Tennessee, to be honest with you. They might have been in over Indiana at 10-2. I could see 10-2 Ole Miss with a blowout win over Georgia, not a blowout, a convincing win over Georgia, being at home, being ranked higher than Indiana. I could have definitely seen that at 11-1 Indiana. Could have seen that, but they underachieved big time, and that's why I eventually went with them, because I look at their schedule. They play Georgia State, at Kentucky, home against Arkansas, home against Tulane. They get LSU at home. They get Washington State at home. Then they play at Georgia, at Oklahoma, home against South Carolina, home against Citadel, home against Florida, and then at Mississippi State. No Alabama, no Texas, no Texas A&M. They do got to play Florida and LSU, and they obviously got to play at Georgia. But the schedule definitely could have been harder than it was, and it's not. And I think that's why I see an 8-4 season. But their 8-4 is going to look not good, in my opinion, if they do go 8-4. And if I'm wrong, I think I'm wrong on them going back than I am them going forward. The reason that I like, as much as I dislike Lane Kiffin as a head coach and why he's still a great offensive mind. I think Charlie Weiss Jr. has turned into a really good football coach, a really good offensive mind as well. I really like their quarterback. I really like Austin Simmons, Sean. And I will admit I'm putting a lot into a short bit of data. But he just showed me something coming off the bench against Georgia. And I mean, think about how excited some Notre Dame fans get about Steve Angeli coming off and leading the team to a field goal drive, which was a huge drive. I mean, it was a very important drive. They needed those points. This cat comes off the bench after Jackson Dart throws a pick. Georgia goes down and takes a 7-0 lead, and this cat, Austin Simmons, leads them right down the field for a touchdown, hit throws. And they lose some very talented receivers, but they've got some guys coming in. The kid that they got from where was he? They got I think it was Stribling I think the guy they got, who's a really highly ranked guy. Got a couple other portal guys. Their offensive line should be solid. They lose a ton of. I mean, their whole secondary is just completely revamped, and that's where I think Tennessee or Ole Miss takes the biggest step back. I don't know that their offense is going to be as good as it was last year, but their defense takes a huge step back. They lost a Florida DN. They lost Walter Nolan. They lose Jared Ivey. They lose Chris Paul. They lose Trey Amos. I mean, they lost a ton from last year's team. And I think defensively they take a big step back. And I don't know that Lane's going to have the personnel on offense to overcome a mediocre defense. So Pete Golding is going to look like the guy that we've always known him to be this season when he doesn't have all those stud D linemen he had last year. So I think Ole Miss is going to take a step back aesthetically. I just don't know if they're going to take a big step back record-wise because of the fact that they lost 2 games they had no business. They really lost 3 games they had no business losing. You led LSU the entire game. Like, the only time you trailed against LSU was in overtime when LSU hit the game-winning score. That's it. I mean, they should have won every game they played last year if you really go back and look at it. Who was better than them that they played in the regular season? Nobody. They lost to a 4-8 Kentucky team, an 8-5 Florida team, and they choked the game away against LSU. So I just don't think that their schedule's tough enough for them really to get punished for it. That's where I'm at. So South Carolina, Sean, what was your thoughts on them? Because I thought about them, but I'm not gonna pick them. But I know you're gonna
bring out my bias with my thoughts of South Carolina. So I don't think too highly of them. I'll just leave it at that. So I didn't think highly of them last year. Sellers is getting some hype. I don't buy him as a quarterback. And I think the entire program is just really emotional, right? I think they underachieve based upon some of the talent that they get and some of the talent that they have. When you see the guys that actually go on to the NFL and what they have, it's like, all right, they should be better. They gave a game away against Alabama, in my opinion. They gave the game away against LSU, right? And you can say what you want to say. Some people might feel like they gave the bowl game away against Illinois. Well, they should be beyond that at this point as a program, but they're not. And I just don't see the quarterback play really taking a necessary jump. And I just don't think they really do the most with what they have as a coaching staff. They don't maximize. So I think they are who they are. South Carolina is always going to be that promising team that's dangerous. And
they've been that our whole lives, Sean. Our whole lives. There's always that coach that they say, even Lou Holtz. Remember, he came in, I think he beat Ohio State.
Even when Spurrier went there.
Yeah. Yeah.
When Spurrier went back there, going back that far, he was, they were always dangerous. Like, you have to watch them.
Right.
But
they were very good.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the only coach that was ever able to actually, in my opinion, do what everybody thought that they could do. And I mean, because you look at that year, whether they played 2-3 years in a row, they played, or was it 3 years in a row, they won 11 games. And finished second or third in the SEC East. And that followed a year where they played in the SEC title game in 2010. But then they went back to being South Carolina. They went 7-6 in 2014, and then they fired him in 2015, and they've never been a great team since. But yeah, they're always that team that's got athletes, and they've got this transfer, they've got this athletic quarterback, and this is the year that South Carolina takes that jump. And I'm kind of with you. I just don't know if their schedule is tough enough for them to lose more than one game more than they did last year. It's another team, Sean. First week of the season is going to tell us a lot about a lot of people. They get Virginia Tech in Atlanta on the first game of the year.
Yeah.
It's going to tell us a lot about both teams.
Virginia Tech is another team that's probably kicking themselves in the butt because they should have been 2 to 3 games better last year. They gave a couple of games away, So
Bingo.
The drones is coming back.
Yep. Anybody else, Sean, that kind of you look at, or do we kind of get them all?
I think we got them. We did get them. I actually looked at my Illini, say, man, could they take a couple of games? Could they take a step back? But I think Brett is doing a really good job, or has done a good job recruiting in the portal.
Is your question, Sean, was your question with Illinois that they kind of overachieved last year? And
I think last
maybe
year
they take a step back because of it.
I just don't trust. First of all, their receiving core. Actually, their receiving core was really one guy, Pat Bryant, who was respected in the NFL. Probably is going to end up being a mid-round pick and a solid NFL player, but he was really dynamic for them. And then Malik Elzy, which was a kid that Notre Dame looked at, and I forget the freshman that played last year. Yes. They're young, but they have talent.
By the way, I'm reading it. I didn't know that from my head. I'm looking at their.
No, I'm just saying they're young, but they have talent at the position. They got a couple of influx. Well, they got some influx of transfers. They do a really good job with transfers on the defensive line, along with recruiting. They mix and match really well, and their offensive line should really be the strength of their team, along with Altmaier coming back. So that, for me just feeling like Altmaier is kind of just maxed out, and I don't really see them taking a jump offensively, but their backfield, their running backs will be a strength of their team. they will be able to pound with the offensive line and running backs. They'll be able to pound teams. And if Altmaier can just not make mistakes and be efficient, they'll be able to replicate what they did last year and have a shot at upsetting a team like Indiana or maybe a few more teams. But
yeah,
I thought about them, but then I settled on they're probably going to be who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another 8-9 win season. I get
Yeah.
that. But Sean, before we wrap up, I did want to make a quick comment about obviously a former Notre Dame player, Drew Pine, committed to Bowling Green today. This will be the 4th team he's played on in 4 years. And what I think this is an example of is I think more and more portal players fail to understand who they are. And we see this more than we should, where you see guys go to schools and you're like, why are you going there? Because teams are just kind of loading up on guys. And a lot of these portal kids are sort of security blankets in case this other guy doesn't step up or whatever the case may be. We've seen a lot of guys go places and not get that chance or not play a whole lot. The reality is I understand why Drew Pine went to Arizona State. I didn't agree with it. I think but once you left Arizona State, you then should have not made the mistake of then going to Missouri. I think Drew Pine is one of those young men that honestly should have stayed one more year at Notre Dame and got his degree and then transferred to Bowling Green or a school like that right away. I think too many young men, and they have this dream of playing at this certain level when it's like, dude, you get a chance to play, go play. I'm happy for Drew. I'm happy for Eddie George. I think Drew is a very good quarterback at that level. My issue with Drew is I loved him as a sophomore in high school. He just never grew. He just literally maxed out athletically and arm talent-wise as a sophomore. And just this is a level I think he could actually really thrive at. And I think this was a smart pickup by Eddie George to kind of get a guy like Drew and allow him to kind of come in and he's going to be a 6th-year senior this year. Great opportunity for him to come in and thrive. But I wish more and more of these portal kids would say, hey, listen, maybe they're not going to pay you quite as much money. It's not like I'm not saying turn down $1 million to go pay for $50 grand in the MAC. I'm not saying that, but you're not getting $1 million. If you're that kind of player, you're not getting $1 million. But hey, don't take the 100,000, take the 50,000, go play in the MAC because you can actually play there and get an opportunity to play there. And maybe somebody at the next level notices you as opposed to being buried on the bench at this Power 5 school. And now you have very little chance to go play. And I wish more kids would do that. I wish more Power 5 kids would take advantage of the portal by going down. Go to Boise. Go to Memphis. Go to a school like that. Go to a Bowling Green, a Toledo. Maybe you don't get quite as much NIL money, but you're still going to get some NIL money. You're going to have a chance to get your degree, but you're going to have a chance to play. And that's the big thing. There's so many kids missing out on that chance because they're jumping up. Go down there, play at a Bowling Green, play at a Toledo, play at a Troy, play at a Memphis, play at a school like that, played in East Carolina, played at Tulane. Like the quarterback from Tulane, I get that he got paid, but I'm like, dude, you're going to look back and say, I should have stayed at Tulane when you see what happens to you at Duke this year. So who's another team I think is going to take a step back this season, but I didn't really care to spend much more time talking about Duke than I did just now. So I'm happy for Drew. I'm really happy for Drew. I am.
It's a great weekend for me. Because watching, look, I'll be honest, Notre Dame fans don't get mad at me. As you know, a couple of Notre Dame recruits literally are from Durham, North Carolina in the 26th class. And I just happened to be conversing with them on Saturday night as Duke blew an 8-point lead with just a minute left in the game. Houston goes on an 11-zip run. And yeah, in the middle of the conversation, I trolled them. I did. I trolled them. I let them have it. I had a little fun. They were disappointed. So when you mentioned Duke, I just had, because I can't stand Duke basketball.
So if Notre Dame doesn't finish well recruiting the state of North Carolina in the 2026 class, we're going to all look back and
blame my trolling. My trolling of Duke's Final Four is the reason why. Yeah. By all
But
means,
I am
blame
happy
me.
for Drew, Sean. I am happy for Drew, and I do hope he finishes his career off with a bang. Because he's a good kid. I just think he made some bad decisions.
This is all I have to say about the situation. Drew Pine getting the opportunity to play quarterback at Notre Dame is a dream for a kid like him. Dream. I don't fault Drew Pine for taking the offer, for committing. What I do blame him for is his evaluation. And I think this is something that a lot of these young men have to realize, is that if you're not honest with yourself, this transfer portal can become somewhat of a mirage, to where you see something that's really not there. You see an opportunity that's really not there. And I think being honest with yourself first is the greatest thing you can do before you consider jumping into the portal.
Yep.
And going where you need to go. Because being honest with yourself will rightly allow you to discern where you need to be. And I think, the two decisions that he made just wasn't the proper discernment. It wasn't. It didn't line up with his skill set and who he was. And so he needs to go to a program. In my honest opinion, regardless of whether or not it ended up being the MAC, a program that is going to have a hard-nosed, defensive-minded coach that's going to lean on the trenches and running the ball. That is what made Drew Pine successful. He should have been looking at culture and what's going to allow him to be the best that he can be. That is what allowed him to be successful in Notre Dame, is that Notre Dame had offensive line play in a run game that he could play off of. And as he evolved and developed and became better in the passing game, going up to a wide open system like Missouri, that's Drew. That's at that point in time, that's not a fit. That's not a fit. My assumption is Eddie George is going to be about running the ball. That's
now they weren't real good running the ball at Tennessee State because they didn't have players. They actually ran a spread offense that threw a lot of quick game, and I think Drew's going to fit that really well. He'll have different players.
That's more of an HBCU thing,
right?
Like the vast majority of HBCU schools are going to have wide open offenses. To your point,
and they don't have line. They can't get the linemen. Exactly.
Yeah. But going to the MAC, he's probably going to lean more towards what he wants to do, which is run the ball.
Right.
Be sound in the trenches. And Drew should be able to have a really good year. I expect Drew to have a really good year because he's definitely going to be a leader.
I look at kids like him and I say, this is why the portal should not be what it is. This is why the portal should be a sit out a year and transfer, because Drew Pine made a 100% emotional decision to transfer from Notre Dame. He was upset that he was not going to be the starter in the bowl game, and he was not going to be the starter the next year. And so he jumps in the portal thinking, I just started 10 games at Notre Dame. I just went 8-2 at Notre Dame. People are going to want me. Arizona State brought him in for one reason only, to be the bridge between Jaden Rashada. And he wasn't even that. And then Rashada got hurt. Then that didn't work out because he knew he wasn't going to be starter the next year. It was going to be Sam Levitt. You then go to Missouri and you're spending a whole year as a backup. Where if the portal was not what it was, let's talk about sometimes we as adults need to make sure that we are the ones saying we do know better than what a 19 or 20-year-old knows. And this is why I do like the portal the way it is, because Drew Pine in the old system would have been forced to stay at Notre Dame for a year, or not forced to stay at Notre Dame. That's inaccurate. He would have been forced to think a lot harder about whether he wanted to leave. And I think ultimately would have made a decision to come back for the 23 season, get his degree from Notre Dame, which I don't believe he has, and then transfer to a Bowling Green where you can then be a 2-year starting quarterback on top of having your career at Notre Dame. And you're going to be able to look back with way better memories than spending a miserable year in Tempe and a miserable year in Columbia, Missouri. And you'd have a degree from Notre Dame. I feel the same way about Tyler Buckner. He would have maybe had to make a different decision if he couldn't transfer and play right away. I don't know that Alabama would have wanted Tyler if he would have had to sit out a year. And that's why I say that this open portal system where kids can make way more emotional decisions is not good for them. It's not good for them. Well, they have a right to do this. Yes, you always had a right to transfer, but you had to make a more thoughtful decision because you had to sit out a year. And so you had to make a more thoughtful decision. Do you really want to sit out a year, not play next year? Because here's the thing with Drew is if he comes back for Notre Dame and gets his degree, he can graduate and go wherever the heck he wants and be eligible right away under the old system. And knowing how smart Drew is, he probably graduates in December, and then wherever he's going to go, he can go there for the spring and then have that time to prepare. That's one of the things that I just really he's an example of why this portal is an incredibly broken system. One of a million examples of why the current portal system is just an absolute embarrassment and joke and needs to be fixed because his situation will look a whole lot different now. But I'm happy for him. I hope he's able to finish his career off on a good note because I think Drew's a good kid. Comes from a good family, and he just but these are the choices he made. And I think a different system would have encouraged him to maybe make a little bit of a wiser, less emotional decision.
Yeah.
And that's my thoughts on that. So that's going to do it for today's show, Sean. Anything else you want to say before we depart? These are wonderful.
No, thank you guys once again for tapping in to the RTCF show. We want to bring you great conversation, great topics each and every week. And I'm looking forward to some great news coming out of the April 10th decision that's awaiting us as we sit and wait to see what Rodney Denham does. And we'll talk about it, I'm sure, at some point this week. And then we'll get back to another topic we want to talk about. We want to do our due diligence. And we're probably going to talk about that next week. And most of all, watch The Voice tonight at 7 p.m. There you go.
Why should they do that, Sean? I'm just curious.
My beautiful daughter, Ari Camille, is going to be performing 7 p.m. tonight on The Voice on NBC outlets all over the country. So absolutely. Thank you for you guys that have continued to support, reach out, show love, continue to do so. Ari Camille, all of her music, all DSPs. Go enjoy.
No better way to end it. Boards at irishbreakdown.com. We'll talk to you all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.